Thank you. Thank you. So welcome everyone to this afternoon's Nutrient Management Board. I'm Councillor Alyssa Swinglehurst. I'm the chair of the Nutrient Management Board. This afternoon we have got a very heavy agenda, so I'm not going to go through all the endless rigmarole that we normally go through. If you could introduce yourself when you come to speak, that would be very helpful. If anyone has difficulty hearing or being heard, if they could put something in the chat or signal in some way, then we will take care of that. And voting will be, as it were, by assumed assent, unless there is a voice in dissent. So I'll crack on with the agenda, and agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the last board meeting, which was held on the 19th of January for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified, so are we happy to agree the minutes? I will take that as an assent. Yep, thank you. Matters arising, there were a couple of things that I picked up on, and you may have other things. There was carried forward from the previous agenda the subject of abstraction, when that was going to be covered through the Environment Agency. He was going to come today to do that, but he's unable to attend today due to a bereavement. So I would like to ask that it is placed on the agenda for the next meeting, and with a kind of come what may, that item comes forward either from Dave or from one of his colleagues from EA, please. Also, it was noted again in the last agenda that I had asked for timely presentation of papers. As you will know, we're still struggling with that. Therefore, from this meeting onwards, I will personally take responsibility for the agenda being out in good time, and therefore will require that all board members who are submitting papers for the agenda do that to me in good time, otherwise I won't be able to include it on the agenda. So papers will have to come to me 3 weeks prior to the meeting in order for the agenda to be out 2 weeks prior to the meeting, which is in line with the original terms of reference. So let's give that a go and see how that works out. But so just you bear in mind that you will have to think a few weeks ahead of every meeting, please. Also, finally, it was noted at agenda item number 5 at the last meeting that due to the non-attendance of NRW at that particular meeting, and quite a lot of questions being raised that needed to be answered by NRW, that the board requested that NRW review the recording of the meeting and provide written answers to those questions that were raised. Now, I don't know whether that's happened or not, but if it hasn't happened, so it's a request, please, for NRW to review the last meeting and provide written answers to questions that were raised and could not be answered during that meeting due to the fact that NRW were not present. And if they would be so kind as to copy other board members into both the Qs and the As, because actually I think that would probably be interesting for all of us and would be very much appreciated. Sorry. Okay. Do you have any other comments on matters arising that are not elsewhere in the agenda for today? No, thank you. So agenda item number 3, a brief update on any re-emergence of algal blooms on the Y SAC. I'm going to turn to Simon Evans for his insight here, if he's able to.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was evidence of the benthic algal bloom has been apparent since about the 23rd on the upper river. It was quite a strong growth of benthic algae. The suspended algal bloom was underway on the main river on May the 6th, but the current rain, the visibility at Ross was down to about 1 metre, and the visibility at Monmouth was down to about 70 centimetres. But that has been put to bed by the recent rain, and the rivers are now in spate.
Would you anticipate? I just noticed this from looking at my stream near me, is that along with the rain, is that the water is turning quite brown, because obviously you have a lot of bare soil at the moment. So is this a two-edged sword?
The issue with the algal blooms, well, the soil brings a lot of phosphate comes in with the soil, particularly if it's eroding crops that are managed for high levels of phosphate. But the algal blooms are all down to resonance time in the water. So it's the time it takes for the water to travel from the top of the river to the bottom of the river that determines the strength and the intensity of the bloom. When flows are up, as they are at the moment, the resonance time is down to about 36 hours, which doesn't give a bloom a chance to develop. Also, the turbidity from the soil stops the light penetrating the water, which also stops the bloom from developing.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question on chat from Tom Tibbetts. Can we comment on the duration of the bloom in the upper river?
The normal brown diatom bloom started in mid-March. That's a standard thing that happens every single year. It changed to a green cladophora dominated bloom about the third week of April. But there wasn't evidence of a suspended algal bloom in the upper river before the rain happened. The only evidence of the suspended algal bloom was from sort of Breadwoodine down, and it was apparent at Ross and Monmouth.
Okay, thank you. I think David Lee, NRW, would like to make a comment. David? I'm struggling to hear you, David. Maybe your headset's not working. Sorry.
We're not getting anything anywhere.
No. Okay, so we, David, keep trying with Andrew Osbalderson. Got your hand up.
Yeah, just to add, our monitoring team picked up some algae at Horwithy at the end of April, 28th of April, and it was reported to be, I won't try and pronounce it, it's Stygioclonium or something like that, but it was more the type that actually responds more to temperature rather than nutrients, but that was picked up at the end of April.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. David, do you want to try again? No. Still not hearing you. Sorry.
Could you perhaps put it in the chat, David?
Well, we'll press on, and David, you can come in with your comment at any point when you feel that you can. Or I think is David gone out of the meeting and he's going to come back in?
Probably that's the best way usually to get. He's probably going to close his computer down, start again, or whatever.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, when he comes back in, we'll invite him to speak wherever we are in the meeting. To pick up on that. Okay, but meanwhile we'll just keep charging on. So we've got agenda item number 4, tag update on progress of the action plan for the NMP and potential division of housing from agriculture, Environment Agency. So Jenny Gamble, you be?
Yeah, I can do that. Jenny Gamble.
Lovely.
From the Environment Agency. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, thank you.
Yep. Okay, the draft action plan has been substantially rewritten. There's a lot of new change, a lot of changes and a lot of new information on there since the 2014 version. There's a lot happened since 2014, including things like the Dutch ruling. So it's all been included in the draft. So I've just seen the message from Simon. I'll just go through my notes and then the action plan starts by outlining the current situation regarding phosphate levels in the Y catchment, and the main body of the action plan is subdivided into point sources, diffuse sources, evidence and monitoring, and has action plans for the main subcatchments. A full list of practical measures is available to reduce phosphates is provided in the annex at the end of the plan, and the certainty of each measure has been assessed and ranked on a kind of red, amber, green way of doing it. It includes priority actions such as the need for a project officer to coordinate and drive the work, fuller application of regulatory powers around agricultural practices in the catchment, and considering the implications of legacy phosphate. Point sources section shows changes in phosphate from sewage works due to improvements, plus other Welsh water work that's going on with things like combined sewer overflows and event duration monitoring of those overflows. The diffuse section shows information on regulation and enforcement, catchment sensitive farming and legacy phosphate. There's a section showing all the projects that are currently underway in England and Wales in the catchment area. There's also tables showing different actions and the phosphate that will be removed by each of those actions. And we're trying to quantify those where possible, but it's not possible to do that for all of those measures. This version of the plan's now got sub-catchment sections, including one for the lug, which shows how practical actions such as integrated wetlands, and again, how much phosphate these are going to remove. And again, the certainty of those actions is also ranked. And yeah, Annex 1 is a really long list of practical actions that could reduce phosphate. Some of those are more certain than others. Next steps, this went to the tag a couple of weeks ago and we've had a few comments back. So we're looking into those and they can be added. And obviously the board need to provide comments and they can be discussed and added as well. It'll need to go round a few other people at any NRW and Environment Agency to have a look at, and then we should be able to get it out there and it won't be the draft anymore. So Alyssa, do you want me to stop? There's a few questions about the action plan before I mention about the separation of housing.
Yeah, let's continue to deal with the action plan first. So Simon, did you want to come in about the action plan?
There was just one point though, I just wanted clarity over. So I've lost it, sorry, I should have had it open now. Yes, there was on page 10, comparison of phosphate concentrations in the Welsh part of the Y against targets indicate widespread failures against a target of 0.01 milligrams per litre. The target is not universally 0.01 milligrams per litre, and that statement implies that a very stringent target has been put across the top of the Y. There are targets of up to 0.25 that are being used.
Yeah, that's fine, Simon. We can amend that and add that extra information in.
Thank you.
If you wanted to just drop me an email with that in, at the last tag, we did say to people, you know, please, if there are errors or things that need to be added in, please let us know. So yeah, please send me an email with that in.
So, Simon, I put it in the chat bar, but 0.025. Not
yes, I corrected myself.
We're not that bad.
Claire, Manure.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to Jenny. Obviously, Natural England have put quite a lot of time into the update of this plan. I suppose I did just want to share that there is still a fair amount of uncertainty with the plan, and we do need to be mindful of that. So the action plan, obviously, and the primary purpose of the Nutrient Management Plan Board is to work towards achieving, maintaining and improving favourable conservation status for all of the rivers. Obviously, as part of this plan with the Dutch nitrogen case, we're also looking to see how we can demonstrate certainty through this plan. And I think Jenny will come on with the housing. The short-term solution is around nutrient neutrality. So for this action plan, it's very much around the longer term, trying to ensure that it's robust in terms of reducing phosphate. But regarding the certainty element of that and using this for the Dutch nitrogen case, there is uncertainties. I'll come on and mention around the targets, and increasing evidence all the time means that it can be a shifting target. We're learning more, we're applying the best evidence we can at the time. So it's in a much better place. I think it's much clearer. We've got some actions in there, but we need to really keep driving forward, and we need to be aware that as we evolve, there will be ongoing uncertainties. And I also think if we are going to use this to move towards certainty, it would require legal input, which we know again might add some further time and uncertainty as well. But it would require that input.
Thank you, Mary Albright.
Thank you, Chair. I think Claire must have read my mind. I think she knew what question I was going to come up with. I presume, Claire, you're saying that the plan is not scientifically certain of securing favourable conditions by 2027?
At the moment, the draft cannot be used to provide an appropriate assessment against the Dutch nitrogen case.
Okay.
In terms of achieving WFD by 2027, that's a different matter, actually, in terms of looking at, but in terms of certainty for the Dutch nitrogen case, so using this plan as part of an appropriate assessment, then it's not there now, it's not certain yet, and that's what we're aiming for, but that is still challenging, and I just want to.
Yeah, so do you know what you need to make it certain, and do you know when that might come by? I'm only asking because my next kind of part of where I'm going to ask for housing to be separated relies on it being, you know, if you said next week, Mary, I think I can nail it, then I'm not going to ask for anything. But if you say to me, I've got another 2 years of a moratorium, then I'm going to fight quite hard to find another way.
Yeah, I mean, I can't put timescales on it, but I would say it's a medium-term measure. It's not something that's going to happen in the next few weeks. Okay. I think just because of the complexity of it, others might have differing views, because that decision would require legal and technical input, but I wouldn't expect this to provide that certainty in the next few weeks. And I think what the plan does do, which hopefully, you know, when you do read all of the actions, it actually details all of the actions that are needed, and so gives a better understanding of what needs to be done. But there is still you can see from that there is still work to be done.
Yes, because lots of the things that are missing are kind of concepts and cannot be really included in the plan from today, but they're still there and they're still sitting there and they're not really any further on than they were maybe a couple of meetings ago. And so Jim and I need to have something done within a timescale that fits within a commercial sector, if that doesn't sound too brutal. You know, medium term to you guys might be another 2 years, or it could be 2014 onwards. I don't know what medium term means, but I don't have medium term, so we need to kind of work out what we mean by medium term and what specifically tips you over the edge for scientific certainty. Because if some of the things are never going to be certain, just, you know, put them in the long list and keep them there. But if there are things that can be done within the next couple of months because they are measurable and certain, focus on those. Does that make sense? So
it does, but I do think that's what the plan tries to do. It has tried to separate some of those and rank the certainty of them. So I think when you read the detail of the action plan, it does just give a much clearer picture on that.
And I have read it, and I go to the TAG meetings, so I am aware of them.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. James Marston.
Yeah, thank you. I read the plan with interest, and congratulations to the authors and regulators who have really brought it up to date from 2014. It's a very different document. I do have a couple of questions. What I couldn't find was reference to the support that the regulators will give to planning authorities in dealing with what I'll loosely describe as general agricultural buildings. We get quite a lot of planning applications under agricultural notification, and indeed as full applications for such developments. Often they're cumulative on the same site, and typically they lead to agricultural intensification, which is part of the problem we're talking about today. I don't see that as part of the plan. I'm suggesting probably that it should be, because without the support of regulators, it's very difficult for planning authorities to frame a refusal notice. So that's the first question. The second question, Chair, is I also don't see reference to the role of the Rural Payment Agency and Rural Payments Wales in this document. We need all the tools in the toolkit, and clearly inspections by RPA and RPW with the potential for clawback on basic payment while it still exists is another tool we should be using.
Thank you.
Yeah, shall I pick those up, Jenny? I think they're probably...
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Natural England planning and RPA. So on the planning front, it's not in there, and at the moment, Natural England aren't developing separate agricultural advice. So we're applying the same criteria around the Dutch nitrogen case in our advice to Herefordshire Council for agriculture as we do for housing. We advise Herefordshire Council in that way. So we're treating it the same. So there's no separate advice, and there isn't a plan for separate advice. If you want to see separate advice and you want to see that as an action, I suggest if you put it forward as a request for the TAG to consider. So that's the planning question. Regarding the RPA, yeah, I think that is a very good point, and I think that's something that we should consider as the governance, either, yeah, for the board, certainly for the TAG group, in terms of RPA's role of administering the agri-environment scheme. So I think that should be something that's considered by the board.
Claire, if I could just ask, how in the existing advice, how explicit is it that advice covers both housing and agricultural development?
I don't think it's explicit either way. I think that is the advice.
But I think the danger is it's very easy for people to make assumptions, and it's better just to be clear. It would be my view, if it's possible to just revise the language so that it is that it's explicit and clear. That I think that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly take that away. If you want to,
I'll leave that with you. It's just a
yeah, happy to do that.
Sarah Faulkner, NFU.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that, yeah, there are permitted development for agriculture and for agricultural development. And one thing we do need to be very mindful of is that the businesses within the catchment, they need to have that ability to invest in new infrastructure so that they can run sustainable businesses, so that they can put up buildings, etc., that meet modern standards. And that in some cases will help with nutrient management and also with air quality and ammonia management as well. So we do need to be mindful that there is a need for development within agricultural businesses, and that it doesn't necessarily lead to intensification. What it leads to is a business being able to plan and manage their business more sustainably.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Mary, did you want to come back in? You've got your hand up again.
Sorry, just one really quick thing. Even if Natural England were able to replicate their guidance to Herefordshire along the lines of their guidance to Somerset and Cornwall, which does list the risk applications, that will help the decision makers have a better steer on what they can and can't do. So the information and the advice is out there. It's just for some reason Herefordshire might have slipped through the net, I think. But there is a kind of a template, I think it's been done by John Stobart, that would kind of bridge the gap for a while and cover all sorts of different risk applications.
Okay, thank you. Liz Deverley?
Yeah, just to say that we are working quite closely with John Stobart. He is advising us on assessment of agricultural development. It does seem to be quite a different approach to the housing, so I'm not sure that the two can be comparable. I think there does need to be a different approach in terms of understanding what the baseline is and the how you measure the P and so on. So yeah, just to make that point really.
Yeah, thank you. Have you got any more comments on that? I would just like to explore a little bit about the next steps, which are referenced, and the sense of timeline, and particularly in the light of the agenda item covering the meetings with MPs and all that. So if I could have a kind of a sense of the timeline on this would be really helpful to the fleshing out, if you like, of the initial ideas that had gone forward to the MPs and the ideas that are sitting in the appendix, and when we can kind of take that forward another step.
If I could just come in here quickly, I think it's the kind of document that if we're not careful, it's never going to be finished, or it's never going to be, it's always going to end up being a draft, because there's always going to be something that we could add to it. And I think we really do need to come to a point where, you know, as soon as possible, that we take it away from being a draft, and then it can be reviewed further down the line and added to and amended as needed. As far as Environment Agency goes, there's not much additional work from our side to go into it. I know NRW and NE have got some more work, and I don't know how much work's going to be done into looking at the kind of certainty of some of those measures that have been outlined in the plan.
Okay, thank you. I can see David is nodding. David, we've got sound and vision again. We've got vision. We've got sound. No, we don't have sound. Oh, David.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear Anne. Marvellous.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. We do struggle with Zoom on our ICT sort of networks in NRW. I mean, I think I don't, as far as that document goes, I think I'm relatively comfortable with it being a kind of a document that will evolve over time. I don't think we'll ever be in a point where we can actually draw a line. Maybe we do need to stop calling it a draft document, but I think as time goes on and we understand more and we learn more, that that document will need to evolve as that understanding and as that learning develops.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I think it needs to be a iterative published document, and so it does need to come out of draft. It still feels a little bit work in progress, I have to say myself, although I think it's hugely improved. And I do congratulate you all for the work that you've done on it. Claire, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to say, in addition to NRW adding some further detail, in Welsh Water is the other one. There's some clear gaps in the action plan where we're seeking information from the water companies as well. So what we do need is commitment to update and provide the details needed from all those, from the board members, from the relevant board members, so that this can progress at speed. So I would like to arrive at a timeline on that. Just some dates, just to say, right, we need all the input from all the board members by for the publishable iterative version. I think we're all comfortable with it being iterative, but it needs to get out of draft. David, are we going to have another go at sound and vision? No, it's still no good. Okay. I picked up on a couple of little things on page 14, just to remind you that the membership of the board includes HCILG, HQ. I was wondering if there's, again, is this a sort of there's a bit that you're touching in places on legislative opportunities, areas of change, but I think also referenced as well of the potential for legislative over some of the rules to sort of tighten them up or whatever. And again, I think it might be something that we could explore a little bit further in what are the other tools in the box, which I think James had referred to earlier, and I think that's a really good line of thought. So not only other regulatory and agencies, but also legislative tools in the box, and that might almost be something to explore. Again, as you're saying, I mean, this is against the changing background, the environment bill coming in, all sorts of other stuff that's changing around us all the time, which is why it has to be iterative, and that's fine. Let's make sure we push it along at the same pace. I think that would be a good thing. And also some detail around the removal, the processing options for removal of pee from the catchment, because that, to my mind, is starting to become quite a potential player here. So again, that might just be flagging something up that's already,
Elissa, could I just quickly
Simon,
add,
yes.
Sorry, I was trying to find out a way that I could put my hand up and I can't see it on this.
No, you can just pipe up, that's okay.
Okay, sorry. Don't forget the role of regulation impinging on agri supply. So that is what's driving a lot of the efforts to remove phosphate from the catchment. And if that regulation disappears, then those efforts will disappear. Yeah,
so that's another regulatory area which is worth considering. So I mean, I've written down the SNCO, which I think you referenced already, standard rules. I think there are rules around movement of manure, things like that. So it may be something worth considering. But otherwise, I think the plan is massively improved, and it'd be lovely to get it out of draft at the earliest possible opportunity, please. Do you have any further comments on that? Do you want to pick up on the point about agricultural versus housing, and is it possible to disaggregate the two in order to, I suppose, to reflect fair share?
Yeah, I'll pass over to Mary in a minute. It was Mary mentioned it at the last tag, that would it be possible in any way to kind of separate the different sectors so that there's different sort of obligations and targets for each of those sectors. And I've spoken to Mary outside of this, and she's going to provide a bit more information now.
Thank you, Jenny. So in essence, the lobby group would like to propose that the nutrient management plan is divided into two sister plans, agricultural and non-agricultural. And in our mind, this allows for a better, more targeted assessment, better policies, sector-specific data and sector-specific actions, which can be attributed to particular work that takes place. And it allows for improvements or decline to be measured and assessed going forward, so we don't spend too much time on actions that don't work. It sounds a bit harsh, but the collective responsibility approach that's been in place since 2014 is wholly ineffectual. And this is completely understandable because the two sectors are completely different in almost every way. But also we do feel that housing has brought quite a lot to the table and achieved quite a lot in a short amount of time and is prepared to pay for what we need to do. But it does feel like we're shackled to a plan that is broken. And it can never be fixed because the reasons are beyond our control, and no matter how long we wait, nothing seems to change. The end.
Thank you. No, thank you, Mary. So I'd like to hear from Claire what Annie's response to that would be, because it's, you know, you have to feel that the plan is doing what it needs to do. And would it be able to do that by disaggregating the two elements?
So my initial response is anything that can help us progress actions in a clearer way is obviously welcome. In terms of the broader plan, I can take that away and seek views, but ultimately, I'm not sure if disaggregating them is going to enable, presumably, Mary, you're looking to disaggregate them and then use the housing one to provide certainty.
Yes. Well, I'm getting a feeling that the trajectory of improvement for housing is quite distinct and can be kind of attributed to a certain action that's also paid for to the certainty kind of key markers. But also
it's certainly something, I think it's certainly something we should explore. I think it's certainly something we should explore in terms of having an action plan that can provide certainty. And
because I'm aware that the total at some point needs to converge and you need to show a general improvement, but I think our timescale is rapid, whereas the agricultural sector is kind of like a cultural change as much as a physical change, and it moves at a much slower pace, and they need to be in control of their own destiny in that sense. And like it's not right for me to keep kind of pointing out that we've done this, we've done that, somebody else hasn't done something. It doesn't feel comfortable to me to be in that position. So I'm just wondering if, while the plan is either in this draft form or in a kind of less certain position, can we not still release the moratorium because we're doing other things?
I think the principle of the Dutch nitrogen case still applies to every development and every addition of phosphate. and that won't change. So I suppose it's just understanding if separating this is a better solution than the interim solution we've got now, which is nutrient neutrality for specific developments.
We're sort of chasing all of the improvements off a tiny percentage of the phosphate loading. So new housing, you know, we all kind of agree is a tiny percentage of what we need to reduce. And it doesn't seem like we're ever going to get anywhere. And I think the plan even says that without actions from another sector, it won't ever be certain. So if we break it and do something kind of distinct about why we're doing it and kind of justify it that way, I'm wondering whether it's got legs as being a better plan, because it can be actions attributed to improvements.
Thank you. I'm going to just, I'm bearing in mind we have got a really heavy agenda. So I think, Claire, if you go away and consider that and the ramifications of it, and report back to the board next time with what your conclusions are.
Yes, it would be for TAG to consider, because the action plan is a joint action plan, so it very much would need to be considered by ourselves, EA and Heritage Council, because as you know,
there are ramifications around that. But I do think the point made is a good one, and it certainly you know, it addresses a central issue of fairness, which is something that is not.
Yeah, it is just sort of, I suppose, just one final point for me is obviously the decision to grant planning permission or the moratorium is on for Herefordshire Council, not on for Natural England. So we provide advice, that's all we provide. So as a member of the TAG, we're absolutely willing to look at this, but ultimately Natural England do not make those decisions. That's for Herefordshire Council to ultimately determine whether a sister plan for housing would meet the criteria to enable them to proceed. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Well, then that's something also for Herefordshire Council to take away. And
Chair, can I come in on that? Sorry, Councillor Harrington.
You certainly can. Yes, Councillor Harrington.
So that's an interesting statement, Claire, because I've heard it said before. I mean, by withdrawing consent as a statutory consultee, you know, the risk is with us if we proceed with anything. So, you know, I don't want to get into the semantics of it, but by Natural England, you know, withdrawing consent, we are having to make decisions which we would be legally, you know, challengeable on. So that aside, if you're saying now that you think we could carry that we could carry out those two exercises separately, and we as an authority have the ability to do that, then I would say to Mark in the room today that we need to proceed with our own investigation of that in association with the TAG team as a matter of urgency.
Well, I think Herefordshire Council absolutely can proceed with that. So Natural England haven't withdrawn consent. We've given advice that Herefordshire Council need to look carefully at the Dutch nitrogen case and think about whether permissions can be granted against that Dutch nitrogen case. So I know the semantics, but Natural England hasn't withdrawn consent. We've alerted Herefordshire Council and given advice that with the Dutch nitrogen case, the previous use of the nutrient management plan in the way that was doesn't fulfill the needs of the habitat regs anymore. If you're going to developing a new plan or a different plan or a way of approaching that, those risks are still the same. We're absolutely willing, as we have been, to work with you on that and to give advice and to feed into that in the way that we've obviously a key member of the TAG. But ultimately that, as you say, that decision is with the council.
Okay, yes, I accept those points. A problem we have as a council, particularly as cabinet member for planning, is that it's very difficult for us to progress things at pace when we don't have the abilities to push the statutory bodies like yourself at the speed we would like to. We cannot do more than we are doing, and we are in this this situation. Okay, that's fine. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harrington. Jim Hicks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to support Mary's proposal, as you probably would expect, it's something we've raised previously, actually, and I think it's there is seeming to be a growing momentum, as this could be something which could unlock the moratorium, which I know is not the main purpose of the Nutrient Management Board, but it's nevertheless an important part of it. Just on the kind of framing of the division between agricultural and non-agricultural development, I just want to make the point that there are other developments other than housing which are now threatened by the moratorium, which are non-agricultural developments. For example, NHS hub in Leominster, I believe, is under threat. The NHS funding is under threat for that, but that's potentially a massive issue that's going to affect a huge part of the rural community in North Herefordshire. It's not just a few housing developers or a few people looking for posh new homes. And there's another education project that I'm aware of as well that a client of ours is working on. So the moratorium now is biting across many sectors that aren't just housing related, and it's getting very serious. And I think this really does need looking at, but I think the division perhaps needs to be between agricultural and non-agricultural development rather than housing and agricultural development.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's a good point. Thanks, James. James Marsden.
Alyssa, on this point of differentiating between sectors, agricultural and non-agricultural, there's one player that we haven't talked about yet today, and I don't think in previous meetings in this relation, which is Ofwat. Ofwat regulates decumbery, and if we're now at 70-30 split between agricultural and non-agricultural development, after the current AMP investments that decumbery is making, there's a question to be asked of Ofwat: to what extent will they allow decumbery to spend further or to charge payers money on cleaning up a diminishing share? And the answer to that question may help a conversation about whether or not it's viable to separate agricultural from non-agricultural development.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Yes, you were saying in other words, it would become impossible. You would get to the point of not being able to bring any more reductions on the.
I mean, there is a limit to how housing and other non-agricultural development can mitigate on site through constructed wetlands without relying upon decumbery's assets to strip out the phosphate. And if Ofwat won't allow decumbery to spend any more money under equitable reasons, there's a problem.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, James. We have also a question in the chat. Does this proposal affect Wales at all, or is it exclusively England? I suppose, I mean, that would be up to at the moment it's only it's not a proposal so much as something that we're considering, because it arises due to the the proportionment of pollution versus the pain. So I don't know. Would it apply to Wales? Anyone got a view, Claire? NRW. David, gonna have another.
Can you hear me this time? Hooray!
Yes.
Hooray! I don't know what I've done, but there you go.
Hey.
Thank you. Now I'll start with the iPhone first. No, I won't. Moving on. Yeah, we've got a project board looking at this. One of the things that we need to obviously do is refresh our interim guidance that we issued before Christmas to planning authorities on the why. So we're part and parcel of this. Absolutely.
Thank you, David. How lovely to hear from you. Marvellous.
Thank you, Chair.
I think could add to what David has said. I mean, I suppose from the Welsh point of view, there's a lot of agriculture in Wales, and there's not so many settlements, but there's still phosphorus that goes in from settlements, and our targets reflect the total load of phosphorus. And I suppose we need to give advice to different sectors and work with different sectors in different ways. But I think I'd require a bit of convincing to recommend that we actually have separate plans for separate sectors, because I think it is a joint problem. And as we've seen with things like CSOs, you know, there is still work to be done on the sewage treatment side of things. And the thing with sewage treatment works, of course, is that 100% of that consented or sometimes, you know, CSO stuff goes directly and gets injected directly into the river, whereas a proportion of the agricultural land stuff that's spread to land gets into the river. So it's a complicated question, and I kind of I'll be nervous about splitting things up. I also think there could be legal issues with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it reflects. There's two things. You know, one is the proportionality, the source apportionment, but the other, of course, is the certainty of the measures that are taken. And so one side of the equation is the least of the source apportionment, but the highest level of certainty. And so I can absolutely understand why there's frustration over it. Fergus O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the point made about Ofwat. It's not generally Ofwat in these matters that would be a limit here. This is a question of discussions with both Environment Agency and NRW around meeting targets and as you referred to, our proportion of the load to be removed. What would be inappropriate is if we started to undermine the polluter pays principle. So if the source of pollution is coming from us, then that's for us to tidy up that pollution or reduce that proportion of the load. If the source of pollution is coming from other sources, then it's inappropriate for our customers to pay for those other areas to do that. Appreciate the point about certainty, because permits and that regulatory process really does provide a great deal of certainty compared to perhaps other methods that might be in use. But it is, I think, a really important point of principle for us that our customers are funding they're funding the recovery from the pollution that they cause effectively through our systems, through their bills.
Thank you. So I'm going to draw a line onto that. Very interesting discussion. Fergus, if you'd be so kind to look in the chat, there's a question there which, if you could answer from Margaret's iPad, it would be great. Thank you. Right. So moving on. I would like to discuss the membership of the TAG, if I may. Well, actually, no, sorry, going to reverse back a bit. So unless there is a voice in dissent, are we happy with the plan as it stands and the iteration as it is, and hope that it will move into a non-draft version soon? Do you have any dissenting voices from members of the board? Voting members of the board? No? Okay. So, right, so the next thing is I wanted to discuss the TAG membership. So because we've got the TAG, this TAG group that's been working on the action plan, that we've kind of developed a secondary sort of technical advisory group. And it seems to me to be better if we just had a technical advisory group. And that therefore I propose a return to what was the originally agreed terms of reference, 2 members only from each organisation, and this will hopefully help to avoid duplication and what's becoming kind of overpopulation of those meetings, and facilitate swifter progress, hopefully, and make it easier for everyone. And I would also propose to include all the relevant local planning authorities, because not everyone was included on the original terms of reference. From that point of view, so that would also include Brecon Beacons and Forest Dean. And the terms of reference would need to be updated to reflect that change. Therefore, the membership of the TAG would comprise EA, NE, NRW, Growth Strategy Manager De Cymru, Herefordshire Council, Monmouthshire County Council, Powys County Council, Forest of Dean, Brecon Beacons, and a representative from the Catchment Partnership. Furthermore, the original terms of reference stipulated meeting intervals of 6 weeks, and over time that's kind of extended. So we've now got TAG meeting kind of in step with the board, and I think certainly for the time being, while we're just trying to get the action plan over the line, I would strongly suggest that the TAG meets with the original degree of frequency, or certainly closer to it, in order to progress the action plan with a degree of urgency, so that it can, get like a butterfly, emerge from the chrysalis, become the published plan, and also to meet the deadlines that are emerging through the MPs group in terms of the autumn spending review. And not surprisingly, I have a hand up from Sarah Faulkner.
Yeah, I note, Chair, that you didn't include any agricultural organisations in that list that you just read out. We weren't members of the original tag going back to the very, very early days of the board, but it was agreed that there would be agricultural representatives within the tag group because, you know, we are representing our members who are expected to implement those actions. So we do need to have an agricultural representative in the tag group.
Well, I think that probably what needs to happen is that there are plans that come forward and that you can then comment on as board members, because you're a member of the board. But I think the technical suggestions need to come from the agencies.
Chair, I don't know if you can see my hand up. It's Nick Reed.
Yes, I can. Sorry, Nick. Hi.
Okay. There always was agricultural representation on the original tag, either through Farm Herefordshire, because it was looking at some of the practicalities of the technical solutions that were put forward. And it was because of that that the NFU was asked to sit on the tag as well. So I would sort of endorse Sarah's point. I think there needs to be some frontline representation on the tag, just because the thing about Farm Herefordshire, where the first thing it did when the tag was when the nutrient management plan was in development was to sort of sense check what could and couldn't be achieved. So you can have a technical solution, but if there's not a cat's chance that you're ever going to get it through, you know, practical farming issues, that's why it was felt necessary to have someone sitting around the table.
Okay, thanks. Fergus? No, there's a legacy hand.
Sorry, apologies.
No, it's quite all right. Do we have any existing members of the tag who'd like to comment on whether or not the NFU stroke and or Farm Herefordshire should be included in order to sense check suggestions that you're coming up with? Andrew?
Yeah, I would tend to back what Nick's saying there, really. You know, in terms of solutions, you know, we would look for support around that, and it's much better to get in there early on those sorts of issues. So yeah, I think that ought to be supported in that group.
Mary Albright?
So realistically, we're happy for the tag to be left to the agencies as you've listed, but we can't represent the construction / housing / non-agricultural sector in the room if we're not there. And if agriculture are there, then you need the balance, unfortunately, because the last time we weren't in the room, we got given a moratorium, despite the data not suggesting that we were the main cause of the problem. So I personally feel that the tag works better and is more nimble and agile. I mean, obviously they can come back and ask people questions, or they can get papers supported or otherwise through the process. That, you know, it's just a quicker, neater way if it's specialist agencies doing the work.
Okay. Thank you. Helen Dale, CLA.
Just unsurprisingly to agree with what Nick said, having seen, I mean, I came to this group quite late, but when I joined, the work that was done by Farm Herefordshire, pulling together suggestions on what could and couldn't work, I think is crucial for the tag. So I think it is important that there is at least some agricultural representation on the tag.
Okay, thank you. Simon Evans.
Hi, my view is that the tag needs to tighten up. I've said this before, and I think the tag is responsible for proofing the data and drawing up the potential recommendations and the potential actions. And it's the purpose of this board to determine if those actions go forward and to modify those actions. And we've got good representation of all parties on the board.
Thank you. Claire Minette.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Yes, I would support. I think it's what's really important is that tag is nimble and can work quickly and is technical. So I think the tag should comprise of councils and statutory agencies with their technical expertise on there, and then the board members, Simon said, can view and give direction on whether that is achievable. But in order for us to make progress, I think it's really important that the members of that tag are the technical input. And so therefore I wouldn't expect the same people to sit on the board as sits on the tag for the organisations. I think the members of the board needs to be in a position where they can commit resource and make decisions, and the people on the technical advisory group needs to be able to drive forward the technical work that needs to happen to deliver that. And I think that situation is really important to maintain, and that will enable us to make swifter progress.
Thank you. Mark Willamont.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think you've captured what I was going to say, Claire, but I have been sitting on the board, the tag, since about October 19, I think it is, and it has got too big, and I think it's absolutely right to bring it down in size. And I echo really what Simon's saying, and I can also understand what others are saying about NFU and the housing lobby groups being there, but I think the tag really should be the experts, the people that can look at the science, the data, and then the tag, its recommendations could be tested afterwards through the board. I think that's the model that we would say as an LPA would work best for us, so that it's really quick and nimble when managing to make decisions, as opposed to getting bogged down probably into arguments, which we perhaps could do if we're not careful.
Yeah, Jim Hicks.
Yeah, we'd be willing to step down and support a much more streamlined tag that's just technical experts from the agencies. But the reason we're still there is because we feel there needs to be a balance. If there's an agricultural or strong agricultural representation, then we think it's important that there's the equal representation from our side of things. So that's the only reason we're still there. We're quite happy to step back.
Thank you. Jenny Gamble, I haven't heard from you. I'd like your view on both the slimline version of the tag and also meeting more frequently.
Meeting more frequently, yeah, that's absolutely fine, and that can be organised, especially at the moment. As you're right, it has become kind of aligned with the board, so that we do stuff in time for the sort of forthcoming board meeting. But we can meet earlier than that and more frequently. That's absolutely fine, and I can organise that. Views on the membership of TAG. I think it has become very big. It's a lot bigger. I didn't come into it right from the beginning because it was my colleague Dame Broomfield. It is a lot bigger than it used to be, which I think it has its benefits because you hear more people's views at TAG, and there's more information during those meetings available from those people from different sectors. The disadvantage is that it is big, and it's it can make things slower. I wondered about the suggestion of making the actual tag smaller, but then having like a slightly wider pool of people that then get consulted on the issues that are discussed at TAG.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, to run it like that, so that you have a core, and then when you need specific input, you can reach out for that. And just at the moment, I think I want to at least try the lean mean version of the tag. I'm afraid, although the comments of CLA and NFU are duly noted in that regard. Thank you. Right, so I'm going to move on to agenda item 6 because it sort of fits together. There have been a series of meetings with MPs of all kind of adjacent areas, constituencies, and a number of ideas have been put forward, both from the what we might call the tight tag, the tag team, and input from Natural England specifically, and also from HCILG. And that's gone on to DEFRA, and there are ongoing discussions, and this is all going to be a bit vague, I'm afraid, because that's sort of the name of the game. But I certainly come away from those meetings under no doubt that there is political will here to try to get to solutions. But what we need is clear direction, clear asks, and as much detail as possible to put forward to DEFRA and the spending review. So if we can bring that together with the action plan that we've already discussed, with a timeline around July, August, and then cut off September, that would be enormously beneficial. So if the new tag could really focus on pushing as hard as possible to get the action plan together with the those ideas where appropriate, the top 5 ideas or whatever, that would be really, really helpful. Has anyone got any anyone else who's been in those meetings obviously got any other comments? I mean, there are other things to discuss. I think there was concern over the movement of manure across the borders and so on and so forth, but the really essential thing is how that works with the Nutrient Management Board, and that they're looking to the Nutrient Management Board tag to get to put something forward. Mary, all right.
Just to reiterate what you said, really, Alyssa, that although they're kind of woolly meetings in some regards, they also always seem quite positive. It means that DEFRA does know about the problem, and DEFRA is asking for us to prepare solutions that they can fund. That is the commitment we've been given, and so they're quite speedy meetings. They're every 4 weeks. Jessie doesn't mess around. You say what you've got to say, then you ask what you want to have, and then you move on. And I think I'm still hopeful that will help the catchment in the longer term, but obviously it is longer term. It's nothing that's kind of next week.
Yeah, and just for everyone's information, I actually forwarded our current copy of the action plan to Jesse's office, so he can see where we're at with that side of things. So he's got all the moving parts that he can look at. So yeah, Wales is represented in those meetings. Christine Hugh Jones, thank you for that question in the chat. Right, so is there any further on that? We're good with that, right? Marvellous. So we'll move on to agenda item number 7. Jenny Gamble doing a presentation on farming rules for water. Jenny.
Thank you, Alyssa. Mark, can you share your screen, please? How we're going to do it, because we haven't got Zoom on our laptops. I'm going to go through the presentation and Mark's going to share the slides.
Right, okay, smash it.
Okay, sorry, I'll just spare me just a moment then, because I'll need to do this.
And this was asked for at the last board meeting. I know it was mentioned that could somebody do a presentation on farming rules for water. So it's not a very long presentation due to time constraints, but it'll give everybody just a good overview of what the rules are and the control we have on things, and how that works. And I think there'll be time for a few questions, but if anybody's got any detailed questions or we run out of time, then I can put my email address in the chat and people can email me.
That would be great, thank you. And I think also Anne, we was asking if she can do a kind of a parallel. Obviously we are a bit limited on time today, so if Anne wants to do something very brief, but I'm quite happy to come back to it and look at the Welsh rules in the next meeting as a standalone item. So don't, for Anne not to feel pressured that she's got to cover everything.
Can you see the?
We can see your presenter view.
So if I put it to slideshow from beginning, it should be coming up as a big. Is that better?
It's whirring, so I think we'll see it in a minute.
How's that doing?
No change, Mark.
No, it's still a bit small.
Do you need to untick the use presenter view? There's a tick on it at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Whoever said that?
There's a tick in there's a little box that says use presenter view. So I think you might need to uncheck that possibly. Can you see in the middle of the?
It's directly above the slide.
Yeah, go across on the toolbar at the top and it says.
Yeah, I've got a different screen to you, I think. That's no good.
If you go hide presenter view, that might do it.
Display settings.
That's fine, Mark, because
that's better. Yeah.
So
That's
is
it.
that better? You got
Yeah.
it? Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks, Mark.
You'd think after 14 months we'd learn how to do this.
Thank you. What's known as farming rules for water is actually called the Reduction and Prevention of Agricultural Diffuse Pollution Regulations. And they were brought in April 2018. So they've been in a couple of years now. The first year that they were in, we gave mainly guidance and advice, and we raised awareness of the regulations. And, rather than leaping straight in with enforcement action, it was fair to sort of raise awareness of that. And this presentation will just go through some of the rules and give some examples of what's required and what they cover and what they don't cover. So can I have the next slide, Mark?
Should be coming up.
So the rules are introduced just to promote good practice in managing fertilizers and manures and promote good practice. And there are knock-on effects to do with sort of farm finances and making best use of manures that are already available. They were also introduced to address diffuse pollution issues, so runoff from applications and soil runoff that might contain fertilizers, and also soil runoff causes a problem in itself because of turbidity. They are outcome focused and they're not prescriptive, so they're not a list of things that people must do, especially when looking at measures that can be taken to prevent runoff. It's designed so that they are people can decide what works best for their situation and their farming. And they're also, the aim is to demonstrate environmental responsibility really and efficient farming. Next slide, please, Mark. So rules 1 to 5 cover fertilizers and organic manures. So if you want to go on to the next slide, Mark. Rule 1, these are about fertilizer and manure planning. So it's looking at sensible planning of use of manures and applications of manure, looking at taking into account the result of soil testing. This only applies to cultivated land. Farmers need to take account of pH of soil and levels of things like nitrogen, phosphate, potassium and magnesium. Farmers are required to do soil testing every 5 years, so they build up a really good picture of the nutrients on their land. And then there's just some information there about it uses the standard soil testing methods. And along, these rules, some of the information in the rules was already good practice. So some of this isn't new and some people would have been doing it anyway as good practice. Next slide, please, Mark. So, as I said, soil testing has to be done every 5 years. So nobody should be using results that are more than 5 years old. There was a lead-in time because if people didn't have any soil testing results, they didn't have to suddenly go and get every single field on their farm tested. But that can be done gradually so that eventually, they will have all the results that will be less than 5 years old. And as I've covered, it's covering things like pH, NPK, magnesium. That's the statutory substances that are required to be tested for. And it might be that farmers test for other things as well that are relevant to their particular farming types. Nitrogen levels can either be used looking at soil nitrogen supply, so that comes out of RB 209 on how to calculate that, or it can be, it can be done with a soil test. It can be done either way for that. Next slide, please, Mark. So this just explains soil testing is only for cultivated agricultural land. So there are definitions of that which are explained there. So it has to be ploughed or sowed in the last year, and it has to be improved by either putting on organic manures, manufactured fertilizers once in the last 3 years. So land that doesn't fall into those criteria doesn't have to be tested. although temporary grassland and permanent pasture would be included if they do fall under those definitions. But it's just to make clear that if there is land on a farm, some of the land won't need to be soil tested. The majority probably will, but not every single parcel of land. Next slide, please, Mark. Organic manure, this is just a really quick list of what is classified as organic manures under the regulations. So it's probably what is expected, on-farm manures, livestock manures, and different types of slurry as well, effluent from silage. So when you're looking at the rules, these are the things that are classed under, organic manures. Next slide, please. And storing of these manures, this guidance, well, this rule now was always guidance, and it was always in the Code of Good Agricultural Practice. So this was always recommended strongly for distances on storing things away from inland waters and controlled waters. So most, this hasn't changed really. You can't store anything, manures within 10 metres of inland waters, coastal waters, obviously, which doesn't really apply here. And you can't put anything within 50 metres of a spring well or borehole. Or if there is a significant risk of pollution or runoff from a different reason. So if it was more than 10 metres away, but it was on a slope and it was obviously going to cause a problem, then that's not permitted either, even though it may be over 10 metres away. So there is there's control over where things are stored, even if they're more than 10 metres away from water. Next slide, please, Mark. So this is just looking at what's meant by significant risk of pollution or runoff. So these are the kind of things that farmers need to take into account when they're running their businesses. So we're particularly concerned about slopes, and especially if it's steep and over 12 degrees, things like the type of ground cover needs to be taken into account, and how close the fields are to controlled water, and that would also include things like ditches and drains that then things like road drains that go into surface waters. Weather condition, weather forecast, because there's rules around when you can and can't spread to do with the weather, and then people should take account of the soil type, condition of the land, and obviously land drains that are already on their property. Next slide, please, Mark. Again, this was already guidance, but it's now Rule 3 for farming rules. So you're prohibited to spread when the soil is really waterlogged, flooded, or covered with snow, if it's frozen, or if there is significant risk of causing pollution. So that significant risk again means that in other circumstances that aren't specifically outlined, if we believe there is a significant risk, then that is a breach of that rule, Rule 3 there. Next slide, please. So rules 4 and 5, this is very similar. It's the organic manures can't apply within 10 metres of water or 50 metres of spring well or borehole. And then rule 5 is just to do with manufactured fertiliser, and that can't be spread within 2 metres of water. So that is a slightly closer allowance there for spreading manufactured fertiliser. Next slide, please. So these are some of the questions that come up, and it's just to reiterate really that they don't, there's no ban on, spreading of fertilisers or manures. It's just more control over them, and it's looking at planning where and when there's a need for spreading and what's the best thing to be spread. And then, obviously the Environment Agency, this applies to England only, these rules, and it's regulated by the Environment Agency. So we would look at, each, circumstances individually on a case-by-case basis, because it's unlikely that, any situations are going to be the same between different farms. Next slide, please. The next rule 6 to 8 are to do with, oh, sorry, hang on, I've skipped a slide, hang on. Cover crops. It's stated that there's not really a requirement for application to nutrients to most cover crops because they're planted to prevent soil erosion. There is a slight allowance for limited use of starter nitrogen on some cover crops, such as brassicas, but generally there is no requirement for nitrogen to go onto cover crops. And then grass growing can take a small amount of nitrogen, but there's not a need for it at any time of year where there's a high risk of pollution, and spreading it during the winter is not good agricultural practice anyway, because of the pollution risk. So soil protection is covered in the next rules up 6 to 8. So next slide just shows, I'm sure people have seen this before, it just shows a photograph that shows the amount of soil loss coming from the UK, particularly note the Severn Estuary and how much soil is coming off the land and going into the sea there. So that's quite interesting. Rule 6, soil erosion and runoff. People are required to take reasonable precautions to prevent any soil erosion that takes place over an area of over 1 hectare. So we can take action if there is significant erosion, but it has to be over 1 hectare in size. And then that's the information that we would gather during site visits. We would be looking at the size of the area that is, having an erosion problem, and that erosion can be, can be caused by cropping. It can be caused by livestock. There's no, it can be caused by different things. And there's just, obviously a bad example there and a good example on the right hand side in the pictures there. And we would also take into account the risk of erosion when that decision was made on how to use that field. So whether it was foreseeable that there might be a problem, or whether there had been a problem beforehand or in previous years that we would, maybe we'd provided advice before and there's been a similar problem happen again. So all of those sort of case by case bits of information would be used in deciding on, how we progress with any, guidance or enforcement that we would take. Rule 7 is erosion of banks of watercourses. So any erosion that goes from the edge of the bank 2 meters inland, 20 meters or longer is a breach of Rule 7. So a large area of poached bank that extends over 20 meters would be a breach of those rules. However, as you can see in the picture below, it doesn't prevent livestock entering water, and in that case, there is no erosion there. So it's not a ban on people using watercourses for livestock, but it is a breach of the rules if there is significant erosion due to that. Next slide, please. Rule 8 covers livestock feeders and where they're positioned, because they can often lead to erosion problems if they're not moved. So again, there's this 10 meters again, which is the 10 meters and the 50 meters come up a lot. So you can't put them within 10 meters of inland water or 50 meters of a spring well or borehole, although drinking troughs are not included. So it's just to do with livestock feeders, and they should be sensibly positioned and moved when necessary. And then the next slide is just a really quick illustration, if you want to move on to the last one, Mark, on how we can enforce the regulation. So as I said, the first year we were giving a lot of advice and guidance, as were other organisations as well. And then, we do give advice first. We don't go into prosecution straight away. We will always go from the bottom of this triangle to the top. And often giving advice is adequate, and changes are made on farms, and that it doesn't need to go any further, which is a good outcome for everybody. However, it may be that we need to take more action. So we've got options such as warning letters. We can refer to the Rural Payments Agency, which we have done in the past, and that has led to payments being withheld. A percentage of the farm payments have been withheld in certain cases for breaches, and then it goes up to criminal prosecution for really serious cases. So let me just have a look at, that's all the slides. Let me just have a look at the chat, because I think there's probably loads of questions on there.
Andrew's been doing a fantastic job fielding questions in the
I can look at two screens at the same time, so
I tell you what, slick. While you catch up with that, can I just pick up? Simon's got his hand raised, and then I'll come back to you. Okay.
Hi, Jenny. I just wanted to confirm, when you say civil sanctions, you are talking about Environment Agency acting in almost a fixed penalty sort of way and referral to the RPA, or civil sanction is the referral to the RPA?
I think it's both, but we normally we use referral to the RPA, and we provide the evidence. So we put our evidence together, that what we've seen with, you know, aerial photography, maps and things, to show the area that has been causing a problem, and it has to meet those criteria. So it has to be over a hectare, or it has to be over 20 metres, and then they will assess that and you know, and take action as they see fit. But we're the kind of competent authority to assess that. But obviously, it has to get passed to the RPA after we've looked at it.
I can second it.
Sarah, there's a question in the chat for the NFU. I know the NFU has done work on Pharma rules for water, trying to raise awareness. We could.
Yeah, I've popped something in the chat. I mean,
that's brilliant. Thanks.
It's not our role to ensure compliance, but what we do make sure is that, you know, our members have got access to information and briefings and technical advice on how they can, you know, what these rules mean for them and how they can comply with them.
Thank you.
Sorry, Alyssa, can I just come back on that, because the Environment Agency had a slightly bad experience of referral to the RPA in 2016 with the first soil protection initiative, when the RPA came out in the summer and said no case to answer. I think there's a case here for the people who are working with the MPs to work with the Environment Agency to ensure that referral to the RPA actually has consequences and isn't something that is ignored.
Yeah, I think we often seem to not, you know, we do need to include the RPA in these conversations, as it were, and that is something that I've raised myself, but it never seems to go anywhere. But you know, it would make sense for everyone to be on the same page. And incidentally, can we make sure that we capture the chat of this meeting, because there's some extremely good points being raised and a number of questions, and I just want to make sure that they're all being answered. That's okay. Jenny, have you got anything further that you want to comment on?
No, that was a very quick overview. But what I'll do now is I will put my email address in the chat, and then if people want to get in touch with me following this, and that's absolutely fine, they can drop me an email.
I've got a question. I've got a couple of questions. One is, do we know what the average catchment spreading rate is for kilogram phosphate per hectare? Tillage and non-tillage.
Shall I come in there? We don't have that kind of information, because it will depend on the soil type, crop type, previous cropping. So, you know, I don't think that there is any kind of central place where you'd have that kind of information, and each business is going to hold its own records in terms of what they're importing, what they're buying in, etc. So an awful lot of farmers now do nutrient management planning, and they'll have that information on farm.
It would just be interesting. I mean, there's a national average. It's got to be possible to get to a more local average, and then we could see whether our local average is in line with the national average. So it was just I just thought it would be a worthwhile thing to know if we could do that through you know, even random sampling and averaging. And the other question is really, how does this address legacy phosphate in terms of soil testing?
I suppose it would show levels, but I don't know how.
I mean, when you're saying that you mustn't be spreading in excess of your crop need, well, supposing you're spreading on a field that's chock-a-block with legacy phosphate, but the Olsen phosphate is showing within acceptable limits, is that an issue?
Can I come in? You're going to have, as part of Farming Rules for Water, you'll have soil testing regime. So you'll look at your soil indices. You'll then look at crop demand, and you'll make a calculation. Farmers do it themselves, or they use a facts qualified advisor to go out there and make sure that they're applying according to crop need. I mean, there's obviously an economic cost to that, so you don't want to be buying in additional nutrient that you don't need. So it's something that there has been a huge practice change on in the last sort of 10 years or so. So farmers are far more aware of phosphate and the issue, and also the cost of it. So yes, it is taken into account during the kind of crop nutrient planning. The other thing I wanted to raise as well was it would be interesting to know how the models that that look at phosphate releases from agriculture, whether they take account of the Farming Rules for Water, and whether the Farming Rules for Water have actually been factored into those models, because there was some work done in 2017 which looked at basic rules, which at that stage was just a proposal rather than being a regulation that we now have, which had and that gave an answer as to what compliance with basic rules would do for the catchment, which was quite positive. So I'd really like to know what these new rules, because they are relatively new, do to the phosphate levels within the river.
If we assume compliance.
Yeah.
Righty-ho. Yeah, okay, good question. Mary Albright.
Just a couple of points. When I read, thank you, Jenny, it was really useful to see it from a non-farming perspective. It's a really clear presentation. And it just struck me that the criteria that we now have for a private treatment plant, which basically is discharging water that's already been stripped by the actual package, you have to have 200 meters between you and another treatment plant, and yet you're allowed to keep manure within 10 meters of a watercourse. So, when we talk about, Jim and I keep going on about level playing field, there's a really good example that treated clean water at a 0.3 milligram per litre tested amount has to be 200 meters from somewhere else. So that's just a good example. Also, the 2018, again, in housing, if you get a new regulation, you might get a couple of months' notice to change the building regs, and then you have to jump to it and you have to build the house to that regulation. If these have been in place since 2018 and you're only still offering warnings or kind of a polite kind of gate chat, I think we've got a bigger problem than we think. We probably need to move those two actions at the bottom of that pyramid together and escalate how we approach it, because I'm sure if somebody realizes it's taken seriously, that would spread and people would understand that they are going to get checked or something is going to happen. And I've completely forgotten my third point, so you can carry on as you are.
No, but you're right. There's a good point about the level playing field or absence thereof. It's a good point. Has anyone else got any other points they want to make on Farming Rules for Water? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Jenny, for that. So we have
I think Chair, sorry, Chair, I think Anne Weedy wanted to just come in, if that's correct,
sorry,
from
Anne.
NRW.
Yeah.
Yes,
in your hands. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little crackly, but yeah, we're getting you.
Excellent. So yeah, just really in your hands, conscious of time, there's a few slides that were circulated, just explaining some new agricultural regulations that came in Wales in April of this year, controlling or introducing controls on the storage and spreading of organic manures. If you want, we can go through that presentation now, or we can include that on a next agenda. I'm in your hands.
No, if I may, Anne, I'd like that on the next agenda, because I would like it in greater detail than you'll be able to do it justice. This meeting, if that's all right. Is that okay? Because
that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
New regulation, I really would like to understand it. So if we look forward to the next agenda, I'd be grateful for that. Thank you. Thanks, Anne. That's great. Thanks. Brilliant. Right, so we're going on to number 8, which is a presentation about the Axe catchment, which I have Paul Cottington from the NFU. Is that correct?
That's me. I've sat down in very wet, cold Tiverton, so I'm just on the edge of Axe. So I'm miles from you guys, but I imagine I've got the same rain as you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, my kids have just come back. So apologies. So I've managed to choose my timing impeccably for all this. So thank you very much for inviting me along. And what I'm gonna go through because I don't think there's an awful lot of time. Can you see my slide? Has it popped up? What have you got?
Yeah, we can see that.
Have you got the kind of full screen?
We've
Okay, groovy. So I'm just going to go through some of the work we're doing down in the southwest around nutrient management, and I'm going to focus on the Axe catchment. But I could also talk about the Poole Harbour catchment, where I also lead. We're developing a nutrient trading scheme, but it's all to do with nitrates. Axe catchment down in Devon, Dorset and Somerset is a phosphate issue, and we have a lot of phosphate issues across the southwest, particularly in Wessex. And the stuff we've been doing down here has been, one, we're doing it very closely in partnership with the Environment Agency. So we work really closely with the Environment Agency, with Natural England, with the NGOs, and it is the water companies particularly, so mainly with Wessex Water. And it's actually enabled us to come up with some quite useful and innovative ways of doing things. So what I'm going to cover in this very briefly is some of the farmer attitude around things, partly understanding some of the scale of the problems, both for Poole Harbour and the Axe catchment, looking at what is being done and proposed, what is needed for a farmer-led approach. What I'm not going to cover in all of this is what is the role of private investment, buyers, governance, business models, tools.
Sorry, Paul, I'm just going to interrupt.
We're getting,
Paul, sorry, it's Jay here. We're getting comments on the chat that we need it full screen. What we've got is a sort of a quartered screen.
Right, hold on. You got
with
that.
next slide.
You've got the first screen and then the second screen smaller.
Do you know what? It's because have you got that one? Does that work?
That's full screen now. That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another one. You know what? That's what happens when you have two screens operating. Check. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the different regulations and everything else. So it's going to be a whistle-stop tour of it, and please ask questions, okay? So farmer attitude, I think, is really important. This actually is a picture from not the Axe catchment. It's over in Poole Harbour. It's it's the chair actually of our farmer group over there, and he is direct drilling maize into first cut silage. And the good thing about this is, one, he has a maize charter, so he's had someone come out and make an assessment in terms of what he's doing there, looking at capability. And actually, one of the things about it is we're going to, in Poole Harbour, we're going to, using nutrient accounting tools, Wakely has actually done that on his one, but things like this, which are best practice, don't actually get included within those figures, okay? So in terms of a little bit of farmer attitude, I think a kind of a key thing to start with in all of this is, in general, farmers are really keen on going into schemes and doing stuff. So we did have about 70% of farmland in England in schemes. Certainly down in the area where I'm talking about for the Axe, we have an awful lot of farmers in organic schemes as well. This little slide is from a survey we did back in February of last year, where we're asking about designated areas. And it was just for the Southwest. We had about 300 farmers respond to it, and it was looking at protected areas for designated, and also attitudes to triple SIs and statutory wildlife designations. And the key things that they came up with as priorities, one being more efficient, which is around kind of productivity side, which also has an environmental benefit, but they put equally protecting and enhancing the environment. So they're key things to be doing. And I think to point out, and I use this slide a lot, and there's another slide that goes with it, which is around those who are doing kind of business plans and everything else, is there are a lot of different types of farmer. Yeah, we all kind of like use the bracket term for farmer, but you've got some who are lifestyle ones, you've got pragmatists, you've got modern farming business, you've got the challenged enterprises where you might see a bunch of the issues. So just kind of talking about a singular type of farmer is very difficult. I would normally, if I had time, I'd look at the different drivers, and it's important to understand what would be their driver in terms of for action and stuff. This slide here, quick one, is those who know their geography and can really quickly look at a map would know that this is a Poole Harbour catchment. So you've got down in the bottom there, you've got Poole in the right-hand corner. the coloured in bit, so you got the red line which marks out the catchment. The bit in the kind of pinky stuff is from when we did a farmer consultation around what we're doing as a nutrient trading scheme as an alternative to a water protection zone, and basically developing our own voluntary regulation. We have about 75% of the farmed area signed up to being in a scheme, and doing something. So there is a very positive farmer response to taking action around things. So very briefly going into the scale of the problems in both the areas, but particularly with the Axe catchment. The Axe current status, unfavourable condition due to degraded ecology, siltation. Diffuse pollution accounts for about 70% of what's going on, and there is a lot of dairy in the area, and there is also quite a bit of maize, and there are quite a few anaerobic digesters around in the area. There was started in 2016 a Axe regulatory project, which was led by the Environment Agency, or is an Environment Agency project, where they brought in an officer specifically to go around and visit about 100 or so farms, primarily going to the most intensive dairy farms. The chap who did it, John Cousins, who's still working there now, one, he's from a farming background. The farmers like him, he can talk farmery. He's very positive in terms of how he goes about his work. He's also really aligned with catchment sensitive farming. And so that kind of relationship there worked really well with the farmers. And actually, one of the things to know is generally I tend to, and probably the same for Sarah, only get the calls from people who are having a rough time and stuff. For this, I didn't get any calls from the farmers. So the approach from the officers that go out is really, really important. Thing to note in it all is, even though I didn't get any calls, there was a cost in terms of what went on. So there were, I think of all the farms visited, most of them there were issues, and they were looking primarily at this time at the SAFO regulations, slurry, silage and agricultural fuels order. So most all of the farms had something to do. Quite a few of them had expensive works to do. So new slurry stores, which are costing average of 50 grand, can cost £100,000. So in total for the whole of this area, there was a cost to the sector and the farmers there of about £2.5 million. And all of this was achieved, one, over a 2-year period. So the approach, as was given in the last presentation, of where there is non-compliance, then a letter is given and there's an action plan created. All of these farms did it without any prosecutions. So here you go, here's a quick picture of what it is to have an earthbank lagoon. Now the current focus in all of this is, one, this bit of work has gone on, and there is still an issue with achieving favourable status. So we've been working with the Environment Agency. We've gone through, funnily enough, just as I started this, the chap from the EA who was looking after the consent order down there was just phoning me. We've been working with them in order to develop what might be a plan and a way ahead. So for the moment, the water protection zone is pushed off until 2024, with the current requirement being achievement of 100% compliance across farming rules for water. And the bit we've been doing, and I won't go into what the water protection zone will look like, but a farmer focused approach started developing from, we work very closely, as I was saying, with various of the organisations through the East Devon Catchment Partnership. And within that, there's a project called the Triple Axe. And it's looking at the kind of environmental, social and farming side of what's going on within the Axe catchment. And so within that, we developed a plan of what it looks like to achieve all of this from a farmer's point of view, because if you speak to these farmers who have already made a bunch of changes to do with SAFOs, and now the bar has raised again, which is what's happening, it's quite easy to go, hey, well, why don't you just change, from maize and do this instead? But actually, in order to do that, they have to make quite considerable changes to their farming systems. And for some of them, it just means they can't carry on doing what they were doing before. So you have to take a whole business approach in order to make these changes. So we ran through it, and we had a few phases in terms of what it looks like to do all of this. And so phase one is doing a business and environmental analysis, and we costed up all of this. And as part of the plan going ahead for the whole of the East Devon Catchment Partnership is trying to find funding to do it all. So first part is looking at a business health check, looking at net margins and everything else within the business. So seeing where farmers are, and kind of lo and behold, there's probably quite a few farms that actually don't have all of those details there. Yeah, it's a really important place to start from. Doing a regulatory overview, so going around and seeing where compliance is with existing regulations. We're working really closely with the Environment Agency, where they're developing a compliance assessment tool, so a kind of online or a digital tool where you can go through SAFA and farming rule compliance to see how you're doing, and it's traffic lighted. So there's different ways of looking at what it is to do compliance. We're then also looking at land capability, which is a bit like the Maize Charter, but going a bit beyond it. So seeing what you can achieve in terms of stocking rates and flow pathways and all this jazz. All of this gets converted into how you actually will do it. So developing a plan, so how the farm will meet compliance. So there's no point in going, you know, you should put in £100,000 slurry store if actually the business can't support it in the end. Yeah, you've got to take a holistic view of it. So we're looking at what it means to be compliant, what other things that could be done. So the role of things like ELM in the future, any other kind of innovative funding models and everything else. So bring it all in, and then going into what it would be to have a full business plan and then implementing it. And so we worked out that for a farm where there's been no advice and guidance given, and we're appreciating that some of this can be done through peer networks because there's a lot of producer groups and things like that down there, it could take up to 8 days worth of support. Yeah, so we costed in all of these bits. And so the challenge we got for the moment on that bit is getting in the funding, and that's what the group is looking at. So it's primarily led by the protected areas, so East Devon, Blackdown Hills AONB and East Devon AONB, but also with the Wildlife Trust and FWAG and NFU. And I'm going to use this, I'm not quite sure how long I've been going, and I won't go into Poole Harbour yet, so we can have some questions. But I mean, the kind of key things that we've learned, and particularly within what we're doing with Poole Harbour stuff, is, you know, being non-pejorative, there is no right way of doing things. So, you know, there's not one way of farming that is the way to achieve all of this, but there are definitely some wrong ways of doing it. Yeah, so hence getting the capabilities and things right. When you're doing all of this, and certainly what we're doing for Poole Harbour is looking at a pretty non-pejorative way of delivering changes, pretty transformative changes to agriculture and the environment, is where you are going to make delivery is not just dependent on the environment, but also on the investment of that farm and its business. Yeah, so where they've got a massive investment in their, you know, dairy, their parlour or something, is going to be different to someone who, you know, has never had to put that investment in. And then it's going to be a mix of various different things. It's really important that the farmers are able to be involved and help control and own all of this, because you learn an awful lot more and you get a lot more feedback from it, and you've got a greater chance of getting these things delivered, which is what we're finding at the moment with Poole Harbour, where we're currently going through the trial stage of it. And it's interesting where you present what the issues are and what needs to be done, and 2 days later you hear back from them that in their discussion groups they're talking about how they're going to implement it all. And that is the end of that bit. I could do another couple of days worth if I was going to kick it with a bit of Poole Harbour, but given that you guys seem to like to ask questions, I'll put over to questions. Yeah. So
thanks very much. Well, that was very, very interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be an absolute mountain of questions on that. So I'll kick off. There's also, if you have a look through the chat, a lot of activity going on in the chat today, and some good questions in that. You mentioned, well, our own action plan actually references the Axe catchment, because it was the subject of some sort of quite close scrutiny, I think, due to a specific funding arrangement that went to the EA, and they were able to go out and do a lot of a lot of visits. And as far as I'm aware, we had 95% of the Axe farmers being non-compliant with regulations, which does somewhat raise a question about assuming compliance. Are we assuming compliance without enforcement? In other words, it's enough simply to have the regulation, or do you need to have additional activity, such as you described, in order to make the regulations work?
I mean, so what happened there was 95% non-compliance with very cherry-picked farms. Yeah, so it was the intensive ones and dairy ones. So it was. And within all of those, they achieved it. So they were all given action plans and letters and being told where they were non-compliant and given a times in which they had to do it, and they achieved their compliance with it. Yeah. What is kind of important about the farming rules part of it is it's a step change up. Yeah, so it will be an increase in terms of what they have to do and in understanding and everything, and will have could have some significant impacts in terms of how their farming will be on it. Interestingly, with the compliance assessment tool and the work we've been doing with the Environment Agency, also been using consultants, looking at compliance across this, particularly in the pool catchment. There are some where there are non-compliance, but there are an awful lot certainly with the lowland livestock and whatever else, where there is high degrees of compliance, and also within quite a few of the dairy businesses, there's high degrees of compliance. So it will vary across where you're going.
Okay, so you're saying that 95% was atypical, was a freak result, and that therefore those particular farmers in that particular catchment.
I was saying I forget, there's like 400 or so farms over there. Yeah, so it's, I mean, it's, there would be, when you go through these bits, it's based on significant risk. If you go and ever do a slurry store assessment, which can only be assessed by Environment Agency officer. And many of the farmers wouldn't know that they were a significant risk from when they put it in.
Sure.
So
no. I mean, it's not. I'm just sort of exploring whether it's enough to simply have a regulation and assume compliance, or whether additional activity is required to, visit the farm, point out to the farmer where they may not be aware of the ways in which that regulation might be applying. And so forth. And can we therefore say that these particular farmers are kind of a freakish bunch of farmers, and that our farmers are not at all like that, or is this likely to be a kind of something for which we?
I think generally what you learn is that farmers and everyone needs support with regulations in terms of one.
So it's not enough to just have the regulation.
It's having the regulations there. You then need to be able to express it. You then need to be able to put it in a way that people can understand it. And
that would be. Yeah,
and
that's what I take from what you said, is that regulations are all very well, but we need to have additional activity around that. Otherwise,
you can do that.
It's likely not to be sufficient.
We had down here in the Rural Development Programme from 2007 to 2013. We ran the Source for Profit project, which was operated by Natural England, ran framework contracts, and actually involved consultants and also Natural England going out and helping make third-party assessments. So you can do those things in different ways to help people along their journey in terms of what it is to get the right farming.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a nice comment in the chat from the member from Forest of Dean about the SAFA regulations. They've been there since the 90s, and the fact that they're still struggling to get seems extraordinary. But anyway, so Mary Albright.
Well, thanks, Paul. Hopefully you don't mind, I'm just going to pick your brains on a few things that jumped out. One of your slides mentioned that the farms are businesses, and unless they're like a viable business, obviously there's no incentive to kind of do the good work. But then I wondered, most of the kind of actions you'd got within the guidance all relied on external grant funding or kind of subsidy payments. Do you think there's like a general appetite for farm businesses to pay to reduce their pollution levels, or is it always going to be tied to a subsidy type network?
Majority of what was done on the Axe was paid for by the farmers.
Okay.
So, I mean, there was support there through CSF, but you can't actually get CSF support unless you're actually meeting the legal requirements.
Right. So
farmers have to put it in, and it's about then making sure that you're putting that investment into a business that one that can work. And, you know, it's quite, you know, these are small family businesses which are having to take on, you know, £100,000 additional costs that have to be, you know, that will get amortized with a value which will be delivered in, say, 20 years time. You know, it's a significant thing.
Yeah. Some of them probably in your area and our area, they're not small family businesses, and the £100,000 isn't really out of the bottom line. You know, it can be justified, but if you're the reason of a pollution incident, or, you know, you're 70% same as us, it just strikes me that we have to kind of somehow encourage the business to tackle the problem that's been attributed to them. I mean, the same way that if I cause pollution in my business, I'd be expected to pay or not produce the pollution in the first.
Yeah, so I think, so a lot of the, I mean, there's a difference between what it is to have a pollution event and what it is to have a risk of a pollution event. Yeah, so where you have a pollution event, then you're obviously falling into having different categories of event, which will get dealt with by the Environment Agency, and you have certain requirements in terms of what you're supposed to do. And all of that gets sorted out, appreciating the resource issue, through the engagement and conversation with the environment officers. And that, you know, is really key with it, is having the good relationships there to get those things done. And actually having, you know, Sarah probably has the same as me, is working, you know, I work there in order to be able to explain what the environment officers saying and what they're expecting, and vice versa to the environment officers, just how the farmer is reacting to it. So you get the language right, because coming in with very technical things that read quite very strongly, you know, people, you would probably read these action letters from the EA as being, well, that's very clear and stuff, whereas to the farmer it's like, holy smoke, that's one heck of a change and one heck of a cost. How do I do this and why am I doing it? And, you know, you need to be able to explain these things, and there is a role around getting things interpreted and put in a way that is understandable, I expect.
And I've got one last thing, because it struck me that 70% apportionment is the same roughly as our area as well. And if you could say one quick thing that you might recommend or that we could apply here to reduce that 70% apportionment and get somewhere near certainty for our plan, what would you say was the big hitter? What would you say, let's do that?
I don't know where. I'm to be honest, my focus is on just making sure you get good engagement. I mean, so, you know, if you're going to do one thing, is just working with the farmers so that they are able to take on and deal with all of these things. You know, what you'll find certainly in the Axe, and it's also in Poole, is there's a lot more discussion now, because there's been loads of work by CSF on things like cover crops and stuff, where that becomes a little bit more normed. You know, the prices drop, it's become understandable in terms of how you will use those and where its value is. So I think it's working with that community there to get the right solutions, because in the end, they're the ones who will drive it. I mean, at the moment, probably the same for Sarah as I've got, farming rules for water is a big conversation. We're doing a big meeting towards the end of this month with the Environment Agency for the whole of our region on farming rules, because it is a topic and the farmers want to build it in. It's not like we haven't been covering it over the last couple of years, but it's something that has risen up more and more and people want to get on top of. So I would say just engaging properly. Measures will vary according to where you are. Yeah, so whether it's a cover crop or flow pathways or something, you know, it's dependent on the farm and farm type. And
I think, well, I mean, to be fair, I think we have been engaging for the last 6 years through catchment sensitive farming and WIASC Foundation, Farm Herefordshire and others. Anyway, Simon Evans.
Just out of interest, the levels of investment that your farmers putting in was very impressive. We're working with a couple of farmers at the moment who, through the business supply chain, who are at quite high risk of having an accident, and they need about one needs about £120,000, the other needs £100,000. They've both gone to the bank, and the bank have refused them the loan on the basis that it's not a business risk. How did you get over that?
I mean, that would be down to the individuals and their business consultants and advisors within it. I must admit, I don't get involved at that level in terms of how they will do their negotiating for their loans. Okay. And I think that's kind of gone.
Second question: we've made quite good strides with dairy in the lug catchment through working with Arla and with their 1.9p a litre deal. Have you used Arla or Nestle or any of their increased premiums for better environmental performance deals?
I mean, most of them have got contracts which have very high standards in terms of what they have to operate to within all of this. So certainly within the Poole Harbour, one of the trial people is one of the ALA directors, and what we'll be looking for out of all of this is support from within the supply chain. So, that in the end, the only way you can achieve this is support through everywhere, because it is not inconsiderable amounts that have to be invested in changes there. And there is a value. I think someone noted that similar things have been done in Wales or something. I know there was, I forget the name of the project, the Blue something or other, where, there's a value to the processes to keeping their producers operating. And that, I think you got to get those efficiencies and understandings right between people. Certainly something we're working on.
Thank you.
Just quickly, the why is the target area for the development of this approach. So I would like to speak to you afterwards about this.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Thanks. Thank you very much. You mentioned as well that there's a WPZ proposed for 2024. Is that as a useful sword of Damocles, or?
Do you know what, as you said it, the word Damocles was in my head. Yeah, it is, give or take. So within Poole Harbour, the threat of a WPZ is, with the measures that go with it, is why we've developed what we have. There's also a threat of a WPZ for the levels, moors in Somerset, and we'll need to understand.
Does that have agreed sort of trigger points?
We've got, there's a consent order out now for Poole Harbour anyway, where we have a glide path that we have to follow in terms of
okay, that's really interesting. I'd like to know more about that if you could share.
And we haven't, I haven't seen one for phosphates, and which is interesting. But within for the axe, there's a review that happens in 2024, and I imagine before that the EA will be making a review based on how many people are going up to compliance within farming rules, and just how many people are engaging in events, and just generally how it is looking. So it that we certainly have said for Poole Harbour that actually, we believe that the threat is certainly as strong and as good enough as the actual thing, and I'm not even entirely sure.
So it actually works. It works to your benefit.
It has, to a certain extent.
Yeah, to an extent, it makes it easier to have those conversations and get some real traction. I think that's very good. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Right, so thank you, and I'm just going to reassure everyone right now, because you can see we're going to run over, but that's okay. I'm prepared for that, and we are going to run over. So I'm very determined we are going to have public questions, so not to worry about that. So thank you very much, Paul, again, for that contribution. It was really, really interesting. It shows what can be done. So right, agenda item number 9, update from NRW Paris, Herefordshire on cross-border issues such as planning, manure exportation and anaerobic digestate.
Did you want me to lead on this one, Councillor?
Yeah, fine. Start the conversation.
Yeah, I think this came about because of some correspondence and a flurry of emails probably about a month, maybe more ago, 2 months ago even, when Herefordshire became aware that in Powys, as mitigation, I think, for some of the intensive poultry rearing units, there came mitigation that the poultry manure would actually be taken out of the Powys Wysack catchment and would be taken to an area which we understand is in our own county, also in the Wysack, where it'd be put into anaerobic digesters, I think 9 or so within one company. I think it was a subject perhaps at your MP meeting, which I couldn't attend, but I know it's been a subject that myself and officers have been discussing, because there's the belief that really we're moving poultry manure from one area to a different area of the Wysack, and we always said as a board that we should be very joined up. Now, if that is happening in planning applications in Wales, we haven't been consulted as a local planning authority adjacent, and we'd like to be consulted, and it would just be a nice sort of conversation, I think, to have about is this something we should be supporting? Because I know that from colleagues in the agencies, in Force, Environment Agency and RW, I think, and National England as well, I understand it's quite legal to move the manure from one area to another, so long as there's the necessary licenses in place. But is it morally the correct thing to do, to basically shift the problem from the upper reaches of the Wye potentially to the middle reaches of the Wye? And is that just making the problem in Herefordshire worse and the problem in Wales better? Because surely we need to be joined up. So I don't mean to be challenging, but that's what I'm trying to say here is these are the conversations that I've heard from some of my cabinet members and office and some of the officers as well. And I'd really like that sort of discussion briefly with some of the enforcement agencies and probably Paris planners as well, if they're on the call still.
Yeah, I have a hand up from Councillor Harrington. Councillor, if you'd like to come in now.
Yes, thanks, Alyssa. Just to add to that, there is also the question of if local authorities, and this is a question for Peter, if local authorities are doing appropriate assessments in terms of HRA and screenings, surely they need to understand that the borders don't make the problem go away. And I would hope that they're taking this into consideration when they're giving permission. And I would hope Natural Resources Wales were probably considering this as well when they were not objecting to applications, because this is extraordinary situation. Politically it just feels like it could be very well argued that Paris is simply shipping the problem to Herefordshire, which we have tried to work together and we do regard each other as friends. So a bit of an explanation would be helpful.
Yeah, can we have some comment from NRW or Paris?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't put a hand up. I've got no facilities.
Okay, thanks. And Weedy.
Yeah, thanks. Agree. So it seems absolutely crazy that that this can happen. As a regulator, we have very limited powers. If that material is being shipped to another site that has the relevant permissions, whether it's an environmental permit or an exemption, then we have very little that we can do to prevent that from happening. I agree that morally this probably isn't right, and it is something that we need to be considering. But as a regulator, there is little that we can do with the powers that we've got.
Thank you, David Lee. No, you're on mute, David.
There we go. So what I've done, sort of on an operational basis, I've been in touch with Environment Agency to talk to the regulating officer, because obviously the company involved is Gambers, and when you go on Gambers' website, they offer a whole suite of services, particularly to intensive poultry units, starting from probably delivery of birds, but principally cleaning sheds, taking manure out. And they operate one AD plant at Little Pengethley Farm, which is in Herefordshire. I got some details from them. They have got a permit. They are regulated by Environment Agency, and they are permitted to accept manures as part of their feedstock. So they're taking about 6 tons a day, but they're permitted to take up to 100 tons of manure as feedstock per day. So there is scope for that throughput to increase. So yes, it is of concern to us, but there are no restrictions of movement of manure across the border from Wales into England and from England into Wales. That's the issue. Firstly, poultry manure doesn't fit within the sort of waste legislation that we operate to. And there are other pieces of legislation like mobile plants and deployments of industrial waste and transfrontier shipments that allow waste to be moved from country to country.
Can I ask a question on that? So are Gambers paying for the manure?
We need to do a bit more checking. I think that Gambers will be paid, absolutely.
So in what way is this not waste? If you have to be paid to take it away, how is it not waste?
It's not waste because it doesn't sit within the primary legislation, and if the farmer was to move it, it'd be exactly the same thing.
But
we've got a meeting, haven't we, coming up, Mark, at some point? Yeah.
Anyway, and Andrew.
Yeah, clearly, what I just wanted to say was, you know, these sites, these waste treatment sites, have obviously permits, which is more sort of controlling actually what happens on the site, you know, at the installation. But just to say really that we've actually got some additional resource now. We've got an additional 2 FTEs to actually look at cradle to grave audits of what comes out the back of these sites. So we're going to be looking in detail on all the AG sites in Herefordshire, a complete audit, cradle to grave, to understand, you know, what is happening, where's it going, and then are they, you know, if it is being subsequently spread, is that then compliant with the regs that obviously we've just been talking about earlier. So it's just a positive move. It's not the whole answer to all of this, but it's just something that we will be doing in the next sort of couple of months.
Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Yeah, Andrew's just answered my second question, which is, you know, what is happening with the waste in Herefordshire, and you know, that's something we're chasing as well. But it's something that I would expect Natural Resources Wales to have an understanding of. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Apart from the kind of the issue of transportation, which would seem against climate change concerns. You know, you have to know where the digestate is going. The sort of marmite of phosphate is. We'll have to know where that ends up, and whether or not the fields where it goes have a crop requirement for that. Whether in fact they already chock-a-block with legacy phosphate. It seems to me otherwise you can hardly say that it's nutrient neutral, because you don't know that. You haven't got that certainty. That's the issue that I would have with it. And also in the chat, I noticed that we have a legal challenge with Squires v Shropshire, so perhaps let's look into that. Do you have any other comments on that?
Is there a comment from our colleagues in planning in Powys, perhaps?
Do we have Peter Morris on the call? Anyone from Powys like to comment? Okay. No. Right. Okay. Well, we'll move on then. Thank you very much. Yeah. So hopefully we'd have some further conversations around that. Would be useful, I think. So agenda item number 10. Progress on revision of phosphate target on the lower Wye, implications for councils. Who's going to lead on that? Is it Natural England?
Yes.
Claire, lovely, thanks.
Yes, I can lead on that. Obviously, it's we work jointly with the Environment Agency and with NRW at the targets for the Y and the Lug. So we're currently in round 3 of the river-based management planning, and as part of that process, Natural England and the Environment Agency review the targets. So that review has started. It will continue through to autumn, and we'll keep the board fully informed of progress of that review. So I just quickly wanted to remind people of the targets. I'll do this very briefly, but they're derived using common standards monitoring guidance that's overseen by JNCC, so that's UK-wide, so it covers Wales. And in 2014, Environment Agency and Natural England applied this guidance and created the current targets that are in the Nutrient Management Plan. As part of River-Based Management Plan 3, and also in light of the NRW targets, we're doing a review of those targets, and we're looking specifically at 2 areas: the cross-border sites and any differences in targets. So there's currently 2 cross-border units, Bredwardine and Simmons Yat, where the river goes in and out of England and Wales. Bredwardine, both targets are the same, 0.03, but at Simmons Yat, NRW target is 0.04, and the NEEA target is currently 0.05. So as part of the review, we'll be obviously working with NRW and looking at that. And then for the English parts of the Y and Lug, we'll review the current targets against the Common Standards Monitoring Guidelines, ensure that the targets are adhering to the guidelines. So although it's part of the river-based management plan cycle, the targets aren't published as part of that cycle. But obviously, we'll keep this board fully informed of progress around those discussions. And if there are going to be any changes to the target, obviously those would be published as part of the conservation objectives where the current targets are set. And we also do recognise that we're also looking as part of that review around the monitoring data for Wales and England, again, just to ensure that ourselves and NRW working consistently in terms of the way we're monitoring the sites. So that's it for me. I just wanted to update the board and assure you
Thank
that
you.
we'll be fully updated.
Yeah, if you could keep us updated, because it's a really crucial piece of information. So thank you very much. Thanks for that, Claire. Right, agenda. Do we have any questions on that particularly? Sorry,
Chaz.
And yeah,
hand up, a virtual hand up.
Sorry, yeah.
So I was just hoping that we here could just sort of present our sort of picture of what's going on the Welsh Wye, and we've got Tristan Hatton-Ellis on the call, who's our freshwater ecologist. I think we saw him briefly before, and he's just got a sort of a brief sort of overview of the work that's happened on the Wye since we reviewed our sort of phosphate targets and the outcomes. Is it okay if we sort of jump in here and just put that forward?
Yeah, that's fine.
Tristan, I'm going to hand over.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen. I hope this all works. There's a hand up there, by the way. Is that? Does they want to come in before I jump in? No. Okay. All right. Right. So let me try and sort this out. So hopefully, I'll do this. Can you see that coming up? I'm just going to screen. Yeah.
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 Great. Okay. So what this is a compliance assessment of our Welsh Rivers SACs against their phosphorus targets. We've done this now for all of our river SACs. I'm going to mainly focus on the Wye here. The original version of this talk sort of went through this for all the different SAC rivers, but obviously here we're mainly focused on the Wye, so I'm going to sort of tailor it that way. But hopefully I'm going to provide a little bit of background as well as to what the JNCC targets are and how they're derived, and it will give you a little bit more of a feel for how they work. That's interesting.
Tristan, I'm just giving you due warning though that the meeting is supposed to finish at 4:30. I'm content for it to overrun a certain amount, so this does need to be a brief overview.
Yeah, this will be about 10 minutes.
It has to be briefer than that.
Well, I mean, in that case, do you want to wait until another meeting?
I'm happy to take it forward to the next meeting. I wasn't really expecting a presentation on this.
Okay. Anne, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm sort of directed by the chair, really. You know, if we can bring that along to the next meeting.
Chair,
I guess.
Happy to sacrifice my slot for this if you want.
Okay. And as long as everyone else knows that when we get to the updates thing, I don't want we can't all be rambling. So if we want this. Okay.
I've got a written report I can email to all now if they want.
Okay, that's fine. We'll go with that. Yeah. So carry on then, Tristan.
Okay. So I'll skip through this because I think you have a fairly good idea already that SACs are protected under conservation habitats regulations, and that we've set new targets. The new targets are significantly tighter, as I expect you know. And the compliance assessment that we did found some failures, not just in the Wye, but in quite a number of other Welsh rivers as well. So JNCC is the sort of umbrella body for UK conservation agencies, and it coordinates and publishes agreed guidance, including on SAC monitoring and target setting. Now, the rivers guidance was updated, it was updated a couple of times, in 2014 originally, and then again in 2016 with some minor changes. Based on an earlier Natural England report, which was this evidence base for setting nutrient targets to protect river habitat, which was published around 2010, I believe. The WFD phosphorus targets have also been tightened around the same time. So this reflects a general shift in our understanding of the impact of phosphorus on river ecosystems. And we've made our targets as a result of the guidance in here tighter, and we've also made them more explicit. Too much phosphorus, why is it important? Well, it's a key plant nutrient. Rivers need phosphorus. However, too much phosphorus causes harmful changes to river ecosystems. It can promote growth of nuisance species like algae. It can result in damage to some species such as water crowfoots by sort of causing damage to root systems. It can cause river gravels to become deoxygenated, killing river invertebrates. It increases the risk of algal blooms, especially in combination with other pressures. And I think it's important to say that algae don't just respond to nutrients. There are other risk factors that are happening in combination here as well. And that's why it's important that we consider all these different factors. And the other thing is phosphorus, it doesn't just get released on its own. It's often a marker for other water quality problems. If you think about, sewage discharges, or you think about maybe sort of runoff from, sort of poultry units or something like that, it contains a cocktail of other things as well. So phosphorus is often a marker for other water quality problems, and ammonia or low oxygen are particular problems there. So phosphorus is generally the nutrient that's most widely likely to harm these. And that interacts with climate change, and climate change is increasing these risks because drought and sunshine provides great growing conditions for algae, and that means they use the nutrients, including the phosphorus, more efficiently. So the new targets are designed to reflect the fact that you have naturally different phosphorus concentrations down the river. Obviously, at the top of the Y, we have some very nutrient poor conditions, and that's something that you want to maintain. And then further down the river, you have naturally more nutrient-rich conditions. And so the different targets have various predictor variables, which are alkalinity and flow, river size, which reflect that. And so that there are the targets for an upland stream, right? It's such as, I don't know, the Marteg or some of the other upland tributaries in Wales are quite different to, say, the Lug or the Lower Wye. There's also a certain amount of element of reflection. The default in these targets should be what are called near natural targets, which sort of reflect the natural background concentrations you would expect. But there is also scope for maximum allowable targets to allow for impact of key infrastructure. And that's to recognise the fact that there are things like sewage discharges that are regulated and that are managed, but where they may not be able to hit those near natural targets. But the default is the near natural one. And so we carried out a national exercise in 2016 in Wales to identify what the targets should be for individual water bodies. And then off the back of that, we are applying those to our SAC management plans. And those are what we've assessed the targets against. So the current compliance, well, I led on assessing the compliance with those SAC phosphorus targets. What we did is we extracted phosphorus data from our records from 2017 to 19 and calculated compliance. This was a pretty large data set. In total, 2,659 individual measurements from 107 different water bodies were used. I should say that, of course, not all of those from the Wye, although quite a high proportion of them would have been from the Wye because the Wye has a lot of water bodies in it. All of the data was carefully quality assured. Phosphorus it's difficult to measure phosphorus accurately, particularly at low concentrations. And there were some high phosphorus values that we measured, and we wanted to be sure that those values were correct. And so we had various tests that we applied, and those are described in detail in the report, so I won't go through them here. And overall, 39% of water bodies passed their targets, which obviously isn't great. We'd like to see a higher proportion than that. So I'm going to miss out the bit of the talk that looks at the different rivers and just concentrate on the Welsh bit of the Wye. And it's worth, this inset here is the Lower Wye. And the different colours, so the green water bodies are ones that, according to the data that we have, are passing their targets at the moment. And then these different colours of sort of yellow to red represent progressively larger failures. So you can see that some of these water bodies here, so some of these ones in the Upper Ifan, they're failing, but they're failing by less than 10 micrograms per litre. So these aren't massive failures and could probably be addressed by fairly small measures. But then some of these other ones, you can see we have a larger magnitude problem and we need to investigate what's going on there. Some of these water bodies that are failing are areas that we've known about for a while. So there have been nutrient problems in it for quite a long time. And some of them are maybe a little bit more surprising, such as this one here in the Irvine, which I can't remember which one that is, I'm afraid. And there's this part of the Middle Wye here near Newbridge on Wye as well, which seems to be quite problematic. So it's quite a patchwork of different results. But what this enables us to do is to start to target our actions and where we want to consider doing nutrient management work and habitat remediation. This also affects our planning advice as well, of course, and our advice in general. So, you know, looking at how these this information can be used. Obviously, we've got some different tribs here. In fact, these are all in the Y, as it happens now. So these two, this first one here, we've got quite a significant failure here. So that's more than double the target. You've got a target of 10. And it's at 21. So that's quite a significant failure and it's exceeding the capacity. This one here, we've got a pass, and here you can see the target here is 25 and the annual mean is 17, as we're getting. So, you know, if you're considering, say, planning, for example, well, there could be some headroom there, subject to HRA, subject to how much phosphorus you're proposing to put in. But, I'd be reasonably optimistic that you might be able to do some development there, subject to doing the usual checks and balances. This one, on the other hand, the Clywedog Brook here, well, we've got a target of 10 and the annual mean is 9. That's very, very close to its margin. So this one here, I wouldn't be as very confident that you could do a great deal in the way of development. So I think you'd need to be quite careful about what kind of decision you'd make there in relation to things like the Dutch judgment. So, you know, this is just a summary of where we are. The report is published on our website, and I'd encourage you to download it and have a read of it. It outlines quite a lot of things in detail, and I think the most important thing that I'd take from it is not that this is, you know, some sort of end of process, but this is the start of a process. I think also from the point of view of the Upper Wye in particular, we need to be looking at habitat structure, and we need to be looking, as well as trying to reduce nutrient loading across the whole catchment, we need to be looking at pathways into the river and trying to block those pathways or trap nutrients before they ever get into the river, and also enable the rivers to flood more in certain areas where it's not going to cause an impact, so that it can get rid of nutrients as well onto its floodplain rather than getting them trapped during low flow events. So there we go, really. Hopefully that's quick enough.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thanks,
Tristan. If you've got any questions, I'll be quite happy to answer them or to respond to them in writing if you
Yeah, you've got one or two in the chat. So if you could deal with those in the chat.
Look at those, beg your pardon.
Picking up again, they can be done at the public question section at the end of the meeting, but hopefully you can close them off in the chat.
Right, okay, so let me have a look.
Just click on chat.
I'm just looking, so yes, I've got the chat open.
Yeah, if you
go, Tom, statistical sampling error. So, yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot.
Sorry, Tristan, if you could just reply in the chat, that would be great. Then we can,
yes, of course. Yes, no problem at all.
But thank you very much for that. And, you know, if people have got other questions, they bring them up in the public question time. Assuming no board members have any questions at this time. Thank you. Right, marvellous. So we'll now go on to an update which is from Herefordshire Council on the planning position statement and interim delivery plan phosphate calculator, so on and so forth. From Liz.
Yes, so just to say that Herefordshire Council have now updated the position statement, which is primarily focused around the publication of the phosphate calculator and technical detail on a change of thresholds for drainage fields. The phosphate calculator is also online with the second stage of the interim plan, which is setting out the mitigation measures. And there's also supporting documents in terms of non-technical summary, the technical report, and a video tutorial from Ricardo.
Thank you. Do we have any comments, questions from the board on what Liz has just said? No? Okay, thank you. Thanks for the update. Agenda item number 12. I've asked for this in the light of recent media reports and focus on the role of CSOs, combined sewer overflows. It's also featured in a recent dismissal of a planning appeal. So I'd invite Fergus O'Brien from Cymru Welsh Water to make some comments on the role of combined sewer overflows.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm just going to, I've done a few things, but I will make this very short. Hopefully it'll make this very clear. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just very quickly to get terminology correct, and so everybody understands, we have, in our network, we have combined sewer overflows. That's where a sewer is dealing with both surface water runoff, rainfall runoff from roads, roofs, all the rest of it, even some land drains, as well as foul sewage. And they deal with the excess flow that we can't bring into our sewage works or pass further down the flow. And then the sewage works itself will also have storm tanks. So we can only pass a certain amount of flow through the treatment process. It's just not possible to pass the total flow through. And the reason for that is sewage works are biological processes. It's a question of feast or famine, if you like, for the bacteria. We feed them on the sewage. They need to eat it. They need to be kept steady. And if they are not fed regularly, in fact, the consequences environmentally are far worse. Typical combined sewer overflow would look like this. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of overflow, but typically here, the flow will pass through and it will continue to pass through a minimum flow. That's the sort of regulated flow. The excess flow, in this case, you can see it'll come up and over and onto this device here, which is a screen, 6mm screen. And then the flow that will go to the local water body will then discharge out this side. The screen is designed like this so that if it gets blinded, the flows will then overflow and topple into the stream here anyway, and take screens with them. But that's important so we don't get sewage backing up and causing flooding for our customers. Here, what we've got is a typical storm tank, and what you can see is, and this is what we particularly tried to do, is retain all the sludge, not only the flow, which we can allow to go back in, but it settles the flow, all the material that was being that was contained in that, or the sort of settleable material, not all the dissolved material, will then settle out there, and that's also brought back into the works and dealt with through the works. We have a lot of plans in place. We're investing very heavily. We have, over the last 10 years, installed more than 2,300 combined sewer and storm tank overflow monitors. We started publishing, we've been doing that over the last 10 years and steadily building up that number. We have about 96% coverage now. We'll be up to about 99% by the end of, or about sometime in 2022. And that is not just installed, but able to report. We're currently publishing our spill data on our website. We've been doing that since 2017, and we are continuing to expand that publishing of information, try and make it more transparent and easier for people to see. We are also carrying out what's called a SOAF, Storm Overflow Assessment Framework. So we look at any CSO that spills or storm tank that spills frequently. And of the CSOs in the Herefordshire, or on the Y, sorry, not just in Herefordshire, but on the total of the Y, we have 21 that have triggered for investigation. We're currently investigating those. We have about 35 million pounds in this 5-year investment period. So this is completely separate for the 50+ million that we're spending on phosphorus removal. Another 35 million, sorry, for improvements or reductions to CSO spills. And some of that is, you know, I can't say exactly which site because we have a lot of sites that have triggered for investigation, but even if they don't get improved in this AMP, they're likely to come up in the next AMP period. And there is also, and this is what I would encourage, is we have our drainage and wastewater management plans, which is really looking a long time ahead and saying between 2025 and 2050, what do we need to do to cope with the impacts of climate change, of growth with increased housing, and particularly a phenomenon called urban creep, which is where domestic dwellings, they either connect surface water into foul systems, or they expand, they sort of pave over their front drives, that sort of thing, and that increases the amount of runoff that we get into our compounds network. That's on our website as well. We would really encourage, it's going on, consultation will be coming out in about 12 months, but any time between now and then, anything you would like to know, any kind of input you would like to have into that, we'd be really eager to have that. And we want to co-invest with people. The aim is to bring our investment to bear jointly with other people and actually get a sort of more benefit for customers and for the environment. So that's just a very, very quick trot through. I hope that answers at least some of the questions. I'm sure there will be more.
I think for me, the question, given that we are not dealing with CSOs generally, and we have a very narrow focus on the lug and the Y, and the phosphate issues in the lug and the Y. So therefore, we need to know, understand what is the role of CSOs in that, where does it appear in the source apportionment, for instance? Does it it's outside? What is the percentage? In other words, we need to focus our attention, where it needs to be focused. Yep. This has become a media thing, so therefore, I would like to understand: is it something that we're missing because we haven't, to this point, been discussing it, or is it not appropriate that it would become a centre of our attention?
Okay, it is already accounted for. It's shown in these grey blocks here on these models, so it's accounted for in the source apportionment. It roughly works out at between 1.5% to 2% of the total phosphorus load. That's our estimate of it. But I would qualify that by saying the SAGES tool that we use for this is not ideal for estimating the impact of CSOs. It's a good rough estimate at this stage, but we're actually working on improving our way of assessing that. But it is accounted for, and it's a very, very small proportion.
Even accepting a margin of error.
Even accepting a margin of
below
error.
2%.
Yeah,
so.
it's you're talking about up to about 2% is our current estimate.
It's 2% of the total, or 2%
of the total.
Of the total. Okay.
It's about, if you want to know what it is of our components, about 7%.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Has anyone else got any questions for Fergus on combined sewer overflows? James Marsden.
Fergus, that clarification is extremely helpful. Thank you. Can I ask whether or not your regulators, NRW and Natural England, have agreed and signed off the source apportionment that you illustrate on that slide?
The source apportionment modelling that I'm showing here has been signed off, yes. So that was the modelling we did, and that was completed a few years ago. It was signed off, and on the basis of this modelling, this is the improvements that we are delivering, this £50 million programme that we're delivering in this 5-year period. Without that, it would not have been improved. Plus, any of the investment to improve CSOs, it was a separate discussion and debate about how we would do that, and that's separately approved.
Thank you.
Can I just come in there? Sorry, Sam Weedy from NRW again. I think it's probably fair to say that that kind of tool, that SAGES tool, there's a recalibration happening of that SAGES tool, and I know we are rerunning this model, or Atkins are rerunning this model. That's right? I think, isn't it, Fergus?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to thank you, Anne. I was going to say that in the light of the new data that we have from the analysis that NRW have published, we're rerunning this model. We expect to have the results of that in June, and we'll be able to report that back to you in June.
Yeah, that we'd be really interested to update on that. Absolutely, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just show one other thing? We have tried to just sort of build on the really good work that NRW have done, and we have produced some maps which we're quite happy to share. So this is the map you've just seen from NRW with the sort of compliance, and we've just superimposed our sewage works on that, along with the population equivalent, and a quick guide to whether we are currently already have phosphorus removal on them, whether we're planning to do phosphorus removal in this AMP period, whether we're planning to do phosphorus removal in the next AMP period. We have a not quite as useful model of the English part of the Y as well. But if you would like, if they would be of use, quite happy to share those around the nutrient management board too.
Thank you, that'd be great. All information is of use. Thank you. So I'm going to draw a line under that. Thank you very much indeed, Fergus. Very, very useful and interesting. So agenda item number 13, which is a very quick update on the citizen science project, which I've been involved with, along with Andros Balson, being I think all the meetings, Tom Tibbetts, Andrew McRobb. It's a very inspiring collaborative approach. It's constructive, and it's working with Cardiff University. I think it's a very good thing. I'm very pleased to see it coming forward. In fact, I was going to say that might be something that we should be writing into the action plan as well, in terms of increasing our database and knowledge, and that you know is of benefit to everything that we're doing. So Andrew, have you got anything to add to that?
Just to say, you know, thanks to those supporting it. Really, you know, it's great to have that network of people who are looking to support the project. And I think, you know, the important thing from this is you know, what outcomes do we get from it? You know, there's a number of outcomes that will be achieved. It will help us target and refine where we're working, which goes alongside the sort of statutory monitoring that we're doing. So that's fantastic to see that. But, you know, it's all, at the end of the day, ultimately, it's all about driving actions on the ground, you know, where we need actions in the right places. So this additional monitoring is extremely valuable to us. I think the other thing is there's a good support network and sharing of this information that will be set up as a result. So it's a learning thing as well.
And this is what you need. One of these other things. Absolutely marvellous.
What is that?
Who's listening, who's on this call, who would like to get involved, please contact any of the people or myself on the board, and we can put you in touch with the army of citizen scientists who are going to be out there looking at the water. Right, so I'm going to leave that there and move on to agenda item 14, an update on the legal position in relation to thin feed pollution and the Kingsland incident. I think I'm expecting the answer to be it's under investigation, but it's a.
That's right. If I can provide the update on the Llanvi, so there are still some lines of inquiry that are active. So that investigation is ongoing. Therefore, can't say too much more right now, but it's still a live investigation that's ongoing.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. And Kingsland.
Yeah, I'll give a quick update, pretty similar to last time, really. The investigation is in progress. There's been a lot of work that has been undertaken on that, and it's currently with our legal department for decision making. So that's all I can say at the moment, I'm afraid, but it has had a lot of work put through it. So
thank you very much. Okay, so now we have the great raft of updates, but if you haven't actually got anything really urgent to update us about, please don't. Why ask? I think we're going to get a written update. Thank you very much, Simon. Environment Agency, do you have anything to add? Oz?
Mentioned about the additional resource that we're getting for supporting the agricultural compliance, so that's all been discussed. I think there's the other, just a couple of things really. We've got some SONs now that are deployed on the Y, two on the Y, one at Home Lacey, one at Ross, one on the Arrow at Broadwood, one on the Froome. So basically these SONs are detecting a number of useful parameters, including chlorophyll and turbidity. So it'll be good information going forward. And this data will be available through a sort of a website that people can sort of access this information. So I'll send the links through on that so that people can see where to sort of get this data from. Okay. I think that's probably it from me for the time being. Lisa, thanks.
Thank you. NRW, anything that we haven't already covered?
Just one thing from me. Tristan showed you those catchments earlier on. So what we've done is we've set up a local group to focus on the failing watercourses. So the Camargue in particular, the Cletter, the Llanvi Lower, the Dulles Brook, Mythil Brook, those ones that Tristan's slide showed as red and sort of orange colour of where we're going to put our efforts in the Y to try to make improvements. I've sent this slide off to Jane Little, and hopefully she will send it around if she hasn't already, because the second slide that I'm not sure how you share it, but I'm not going to do that. I think the second slide just shows some of the measures that we've put in place from 2016 to 2018. There's a whole raft of work that we've done in combination with farmers, stakeholders, Wyanusk Foundation and other bodies. And I think that the purpose of that is just to show that this isn't a sort of, there's maybe no quick wins out there. This is not going to help what Mary and Jim are talking about, but there's really no quick wins in terms of those catchments, because there's been an awful lot of work already done in combination with stakeholders. So that was something, Chair, I wanted just to point out.
Great, lovely, thanks a lot, David. Duca Marie.
Chair, thanks very much. Yes, sorry, I was just getting myself off mute. Hello. Right, I'll do a very quick headline summary, and then if anyone has any particular schemes they'd like to know about, then they can contact us afterwards, but without going through them all in detail. So of the phosphorus removal reduction schemes that we've got on the Y, 6 are now at optioneering stage. 2 are already in progress. Teams are on site, and one is at detailed design, and that's because we're trialing a new technology there. So a bit of negotiation with EA to really understand how we can make the most out of this new phosphorus removal technology, with the goal of using, not just removing phosphorus, but also looking a bit wider and making sure we're doing it in the most lowest carbon friendly way as well, without just sort of hammering more equipment onto site. So yeah, really brilliant technology we're hoping to advance there. So look forward to updating you on that. From the wetlands perspective, I'm sure Woof will come on to this, but from Ducumry's perspective, from Cannonpine and Dilwyn, all surveys have taken place for sites now, and including the designs, the basic designs for the onward connections going from our existing treatment works to facilitate the wetlands. So that's now ready from our perspective. There's a bit of discussion now on the permitting side of things with EA and Woof, but otherwise we're good to go from an engineering perspective. On the 8 potential Herefordshire wetlands, yeah, Liz and I speak hourly, I think, at the moment, and making some really good progress there. Got some fantastic sampling in place to help guide our understanding of the feasibility and design. And yeah, we're just progressing through the land agreements and rights of access logistics on that. So yeah, lots of progress on the schemes and that proactive work there.
That's very good. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Right, local planning authorities, Herefordshire.
I come in here, I think Mark has just stepped out a moment, so there's nothing further to add. I think Vivian has sort of updated on our wetlands. So yeah, there's a lot of preparation being done behind the scenes in terms of survey work and acquiring the land. So that's all underway.
I'm not sure we have anyone from Paris Planning Authority on the call. No, okay. Monmouthshire, anyone from Monmouthshire Planning Authority?
Hello, yes, it's Craig O'Connor.
Hello.
Here. Hello there. Well, thank you for having me. Head of Planning for Monmouthshire. Yes, we are obviously new to this situation in terms of the regulations that NRW have brought out. So this has been a massive learning exercise listening to the conversation this afternoon. So thanks everyone for inviting me, and happy to be involved in the future. Very much working with Powys, Brecon Beacons, Carmarthenshire and Wales at the moment, finding our feet with this. We're currently getting legal opinion on a Wales basis in terms of what type of applications are considered by this, in terms of discharge conditions, natural NMAs, in terms of non-material minded amendments, to see exactly what is covered. We're also looking at working on a Wales basis in terms of creating some sort of phosphate calculator. I know that's been done in Herefordshire and other areas as well. So looking to pick up on some of the good work that's been done already. There's also other ongoing piece of work in terms of solutions, so very much discussing things with Welsh Water in terms of which sewerage system does have headroom and where potentially the future AMP process should go. So very, very interesting, and happy to explore really in terms of ecological solutions and natural solutions, very much learning as we go. So yes, infancy, I would suggest, in terms of working with some of this, but it's certainly a very steep learning curve. So happy to learn.
It definitely makes sense not to be reinventing the wheel, and so I'm sure all the planning authorities will be happy to help you with in whatever way, with phosphate calculators, whatever, in order to assist you. Thank you very much, and thank you for attending the meeting. Forest of Dean. I think that we did have a member, but he had to leave. I think that's okay. Brecon Beacons National Park.
I think I'm the last man standing, Alyssa.
Stout fellow, James.
I'm a member, Welsh Government appointed member of the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. We are grappling with the reality that 70% of the national park is covered by a similar moratorium to that which Herefordshire Council faces in the Lug catchment as a result of the NRW advice. We're also thinking hard about our potential for the use of the planning system, and we find ourselves very constrained in the use of the planning system as a regulatory tool. Very conscious that each time we make a planning decision that has implications downstream. And we're thinking about that. We don't have any solutions as yet, and we look forward to the Decumry review of the modelling we heard about from from Fergus in June. And we particularly look forward to hearing about the modelling for the USK.
Yeah, thank you. Farm Herefordshire, I think Nick's had to go. NFU.
Nothing from us.
Thank you, Sarah. Kilg. Mary, anything additional?
We need a new acronym, don't we? So
you really do.
It was hastily delivered, that's why.
I've got a Mary and the Merry Men.
Mary and Jim, like a children's TV show, I think. But well, no, nothing to add because of time constraints. But I just noticed there were a few things that have cropped up that might go into the action plan. So the Welsh Water spend on consented storm overflows and the EA extra legs, extra boots, I think Dave calls it. Those are both, to me, actions that are funded and certain. Hopefully they
can. If you could bing that over in an email to Jenny.
Yeah.
Just make sure that she's got that kind of, you know.
I'm sure they're a game changer, and Claire's going to say it's certain tomorrow.
Well, there's all
absolutely.
Thanks, Claire.
Don't forget that.
Claire. Oh, my Claire.
No, it's recorded. I've got it. Excellent.
Still with us. Right. Now that's my favourite bit, public questions. Woo. So do we have any questions from members of the public? Oh, come on. Right, Helen Hamilton. Excellent. Where are you, Helen? Oh, there we are.
There we are. Unmute. Right, sorry. Can I ask two questions?
Go on.
Okay, so my first one is about the measures in the action plan, and it's very striking that the most certain measures in the action plan are the proposed wetlands. What I'm really surprised to see is that the proposed wetlands are also, even though they're in part of the nutrient management plan, are being used to provide headroom for further development. And I'd be interested to know whether legal advice has been taken on this, because I can't see how that can happen, because for two reasons. One is that you cannot use mitigation that would compromise the ability to restore the designated site to good condition. So that's the first one, because by taking some of the benefit of the nutrient management plan away, you're compromising its ability to deliver. And secondly, because, and this is a question about phosphate trading in general, and I just think, I would just like legal clarity on it, is that phosphate trading is not mitigation, it's compensation, because you are allowing the development that will cause an adverse impact and then doing something else downstream to compensate for that impact. And under the habitat regulations, you can only provide compensation for development that is delivered for overriding reasons of public interest. So I'd really like to know whether advice has been taken on that. I mean, I ask these questions having discussed them with barristers who agree that this is, this is an area where there is a potential for legal challenge. I'm not saying for a minute that I'm going to be involved in that, but I'm just flagging up what appears to be a risk. That's my first question. Can
we do it one at a time, Helen? Is that okay? And somebody's typing and they're not on mute, so you could mute and then type. That'd be marvelous. Who wants to answer that first question? No, I mean, I think there is a challenge, isn't there, coming forward in Hampshire on the plan there. So presumably we will know more. Well, once that's kind of worked its way through.
Yeah, that's the hearing finished yesterday, but I understand that judgment has been reserved. But that relates to nitrates, which are going to be a bit.
Well, indeed, but it would give us some sort of a.
But it would, yes, certainly,
yeah. Yeah. Has anyone got anything to add to that, or is there something that needs a written legal answer?
Yeah, I think what I'd say is that we it's a really good question, and it's a question we probably don't have the answer to right now, but it's something we definitely need to seek the answer to. As we work through these issues, as organisations on both sides of the border.
Has anyone got anything to add? No. Simon's got his hand up there. Come on, Simon. You have a.
I had some good news that I was going to mention, but now I feel sick in the pit of my stomach.
Okay.
But no, the good news is that
Helen, look at the effects you have.
We're working while just basically potentially looking at the collapse of the Winehouse Foundation, but never mind. We're looking at. We're trying to work up with Avara combined heat and power. Sorry, just do there. We're working up with Avara under the court hold initiative to build heat and power plants, or that they're going to bring forward proposals for heat and power. They could potentially take around 1,300 tons of phosphate out of the loading on the River Wye. Subject to logistics and subject to planning. That is a material change. It's in my report, but I thought I'd just raise it.
But thank you, Simon. And it is, but it's not entirely relevant to the point I think that Helen's making about whether or not you can, as it were, double counter benefit. I think is the point, isn't it? Well, I'm sorry, Helen, we don't appear to have an answer for you on that one. So, question 2.
Okay, I mean, just I'm just flagging up that somebody needs to be checking and taking legal advice before committing funds and going down that route. I don't want to stand in the way of lifting the moratorium, and I certainly don't want to harm the Manures Foundation, but I'm just flagging it up. My second question goes back to the cross-border issue. And it's about the new guidance that Hereford Council has issued. So there's a suite of guidance on habitats regulations assessment around the river lug position statement. And there is one document, advising of the need to carry out habitats regulations assessment for development affecting the Wye catchment. But there's only one map that's provided in this suite of information, and that map shows the River Lug catchment and the part of the River Wye catchment that discharges to the Wye in Herefordshire. The sections of the River Wye which discharge into the Wye across the border in Wales are simply left off the map. So, and there already is misunderstanding about whether or not habitats regulations assessment is required at all if the water goes across the border into Wales. And I've checked on this, and there is no standing agreement for NRW to take responsibility for these parts of the catchment. So has anybody looked at this map? Will a correct map be put up on the Herefordshire Council website?
Thank you. Thanks, Liz.
Yep. So my understanding is that the catchment map is based on EA mapping, and at this point in time, we take our advice from Natural England. So if we are advised as an outcome, if you like, of perhaps any legal challenges that are taking place, that we need to amend the map, then obviously we will do so.
Thank you.
Does NRW have any thoughts on that?
David?
I'll have to take it away and come back. I'm not sure. I think Lizzie's answer is spot on. It has to be for Natural England to make that decision, and then to consult with us and with Powys. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Tom Tibbets. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. It's a little bit frustrating being relegated to almost the fourth hour of an MB board meeting to make comments on what's been going on. I particularly want to just start by putting on the public record that I think it's absolutely outrageous that Powys County Council have not bothered to turn up and contribute to this meeting, particularly on agenda item 9, which clearly states that they're responsible for delivering that agenda item. And the point, and one of the things that dogs this river, is the fact it's stuck between two different regulatory regimes, one half in Wales and then half in England, then back into Wales, back into England. And it's just left high and dry by completely disjoined thinking. And this is ably demonstrated by Powys's complete and utter disregard for this meeting. It's the bloody co-chair. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, I did want to talk about the NMP plan, because it strikes me, having read through Annex 1 and other parts of it, there's a comment on page 5 which says, and I'll just read it out, sorry, page 6, which says, I'll read it out of my notes. DEFRA review of voluntary action and farm advice should be undertaken in order to see how effective it is. And yet, if you go to Annex 1, you can see that all of the farm actions are listed as being bright red, which means that their effectiveness is frankly unknown. So I think Annex 1 gives you your answer, that this voluntary farm advice approach, it may be a very nice way of approaching farmers, but its effectiveness is completely unaccountable and unknowable. And there has to be, a real tightening of enforcement to make and accountability for what's going on to make these things work. The second thing I'd like to ask about is why on page 39, which is in Annex 1, some other practical actions, which include transporting excess phosphorus from dairy plants to arable farms, making compost available to improve soil condition, and reducing the intensity of agricultural production, most importantly, why these have not been given any kind of detailed P reduction certainty or even a source for further information in the table. Everything else is red, green, yellow, or blue, but this particular area is bright white, and I want to know why. Because it strikes me that particularly reducing the intensity of poultry farming and therefore reducing the need to import fodder into the catchment, which contains phosphorus and gets pooed out the back of the chicken into the catchment, the only place that spread manure can go is back into the river at the moment. So it's pretty obvious to anyone who does a mass balance calculation that there's a net inflow of phosphorus into the catchment, and that stopping that would go a long way to reducing the net flow out of the catchment. And I do want to make one last question, which is on page 30. No, it isn't. It's on page 19. And that's to ask the authors of the report how they arrived at their calculated numbers. Obviously, 195 intensive poultry units in the wild, that's probably knowable from planning applications. But how do they come to 9 million birds generating 2,040 tons of phosphate per annum, please?
Okay. there anyone present who can answer those questions?
What document was it, Tom? Tell me again.
The draft NMP plan, the NMP action plan, it's entitled on my thing. It's a PDF, it's about 46 pages long. Natural Resources Wales, Environment Agency and Natural England are the authors. Draft for tag 29th of April 2021.
Unfortunately, Tom, I think probably Jenny
Let's check and come back to you. Yeah.
Who's going to know
Sorry.
that?
Yeah. I've got the document open, but it's finding the right pages. It may take me a little bit of time. I'll come back to you, Tom.
Okay, and then I've got another specific question for Herefordshire County Council, and that is, why do they consider the Dore, which drains into the Mono, which drains into the Wye, to be without of the Wye catchment? And I want an honest and succinct answer, please.
Probably one for Liz. Why is the Dore not in the Wye catchment?
Mark, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, we should be very careful about what we say in a meeting like this.
Okay.
Sorry, this is subject to legal challenge at the moment, so we're not at liberty to discuss this in the public domain.
But would you accept that currently Herefordshire County Council considers the Dore, which drains into the Mono, which drains into the Wye, to be out with of the Wye SAC catchment?
I can only repeat my
yeah, I think we're going to go around in small circles with that one, Tom.
I know the answer.
Thank you for the question. Tom, if you could, if you've got the other questions written down, if you could send them over to me, I'll make sure that they get to Jenny so that you get a full, because she had to go and get on with her life. So if you could, that'd be great. And then I'll make sure you get an answer. That's fantastic. Thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Christine? You're on mute, Christine. She's suffering from the same problem that Tom was suffering from earlier with the internet. No, but we'll come back.
Yeah, got there.
Oh, no, she's there. All right, okay.
Just a different pattern from I'm used to having. I wanted to take up something that Tom's mentioned briefly about the figures. I mean, one of the problems with the SAGIS modelling, which I don't really understand what's put in, but with almost everything else that happens with planning about these issues, is that nobody seems to know how many intensive poultry units there are. And certainly that figure must be a way underestimate. And there are a whole lot of other intensive units for pig farming, which don't even go through planning as such. They are approved as agricultural sheds or livestock buildings. No questions are asked. NRW requires no ammonia assessments or manure management plans, and they're dotted all over the place. We've identified something going on for 20 of these in Paris, and I'm sure we haven't found them all. Now, at the moment, there was a letter in the Brecon and Radnor Express about pig slurry being plastered all over fields right next to the Wye, from what turns out to be one of these unapproved pig units. And it's just a question about the regulatory structure. Whose business is that? Powys approved the unit without asking about it. NRW wrote, I can't remember with this one whether they wrote a response or not, but they certainly obviously didn't ask whether it was a pig unit or not. We have a lot of units where the local council has approved, providing it's not an intensive pig unit, and yet it gets approved and that doesn't get written in the officer's report. I'm afraid the head of planning is not here at the moment, but this is an absolutely ridiculous situation, and I don't know whether it's happening in Hereford as well.
Okay, I think that's yeah. I mean, it certainly is a challenge, and it's something that I think is in the action plans to gain a deeper understanding of livestock numbers, where they're not kind of clear. And as you say, pig units is one of those things, particularly if they're falling under a license. It's really hard to know what's going on. These numbers are probably held centrally by DEFRA, but whether we'd ever have access to them, who knows? But
are they? I mean, are they held by DEFRA?
Well,
you don't know.
Well, certainly, you generally have to do an annual inventory, which just goes to DEFRA. Does anyone, David, you put your hand up, you can take that one on?
I put my hand up. I don't know whether it shows on the screen. I'm expecting some data from possibly DEFRA, but I'm expecting some data on the number of holdings in Powys where there's more than 100 pigs on site. So, obviously some smallholders may have one or two, but they have to register, and we can get that data. So we'll use that then, Christine, to cross-check with that stuff that you sent me recently. But it is something that's on our radar, and we do ask that question of Powys when we see applications. We may not at first, but we certainly are now, and we have been doing since probably the middle of last year, asking that question, what are they doing? And we are aware that people have sort of changed their plans because we've maybe caught them out, perhaps. We've maybe asked the right question about pigs by stealth.
Pigs by stealth, I like it. Thanks, David. Have we got anything to add to that about what we do? We have pigs by stealth? Stealth pigs.
So I don't know if we've got any planning officers on the call at the moment. I mean, I suppose it's something that you're always concerned of in the planning application, and if things aren't quite as they are. But all I would say is at the moment is that all our applications go through a thorough HRA and then appropriate assessment. And if there's any likely significant effect on the river, then that will come out. It won't come out positive, will it? So it's likely that the application will be refused.
It might be worth having a conversation with David NRW, and that you learn from each other and have a joined up approach. Both sides of the border on this would make sense. David, you talking to Claire about this?
I think it's what we're trying to do is say in those catchments that we've identified where we've got concerns about the amount of phosphate that's there above that SAP target. We're doing a bit of work now on the intelligence of what's going on in those catchments to give us some of those areas where we need to find out more. And I think that'll be the point where we'll be talking with Natural England and others about some of those gaps.
It also makes sense if you're making an approach to, say, DEFRA, that was a cross-border.
Yeah. I'll have a look. Once I get the data, I'll see how wide it is and whether I can share it, or whether I can ask somebody else to share.
Or if you just kind of work with Natural England and to make sure you're doing the same thing if it's working for you, that would be great. Thanks, David. Andrew McRobb.
Hi, thank you, Alyssa. Firstly, I'd just like to give my wholehearted support for the consideration of getting the delivery of papers and agenda out early. I think that's absolutely critical. Secondly, I'd like to give my complete support for the idea of reduction in the tag and more regular meetings. I think it is essential that it is the scientific people that are affecting tag and not lobby groups. So I wholeheartedly hope that goes through. I'm now going to put my Greta Thunberg hat on and simply say to all of you, what are you actually doing? Since 2015, you keep having meetings. You have quarterly meetings that go forever. I share a lot of what Tom said earlier. You actually have to up your game. You have to actually start delivering. I've seen good signs today, but understand this is no different from all the governments talking about climate change and not going anywhere. You have to start making movements. You can't keep saying, oh, it's all going for a review. We're going for a review for the next meeting. get some policies, make it happen. I can't say how strongly I think about that. This is typical of typical of public bodies. In the commercial world, you would all fall apart. And I'm not being rude here, but commercial operations have to assimilate the facts, take decisions, move forward. Were they the right decisions? Maybe, maybe not. They have to adapt and improvise and overcome. And I think that's the essence we need to get through all these public bodies. You know, how can you not turn up for meetings? I'd be fired if I didn't turn up for my commercial meetings. I'd lose my directorships. You know, there's a responsibility. And I'd just like to say, I'd like you all to take on that responsibility, all to listen to Greta Thunberg and actually just now do something. Sorry for that speech, but I feel passionately about it.
No, it's understood and accepted. Thanks for that, Andrew. Mary.
Thank you, Andrew. It's really difficult because I never want to be the person that says these things, but you're spot on. But it's even worse than that. So in a commercial world, this kind of group and the way it's being taken from 2014 wouldn't be allowed. But it's actually harming a commercial world that employs really good craftsmen, builders, all sorts of people that you can't even begin to imagine how this is imploding their lives. And so we do have to do something, and we can't keep going around. And I just beg you all to think of what could be done to make this plan certain, to get Jim and I out of this misery.
Thank you, Mary. Right, and on that note, and that salutary note, thank you for giving us a kick up the arse. Is a good thing. I'm going to turn to the next item on the agenda, which is date of the next meeting, which will be set once I've had a chance to look at the diary and work out a date. And working back from then, obviously, as promised, the appropriate periods for agenda items and so forth, so that we all have a bit more of a chance to assimilate what's got sometimes can be a massive amount of information in these agendas. So, right, at that point, I'm going to say thank you all very much for your attendance, members of the public. Thank you for your patience. I know it's I do have sympathy with Tom, and I never know whether it's better to do it at the front, but then you want to respond to the meeting. It's, you know, anyway. And to remind whoever it is, can we please capture the chat? Really important. There's a lot of questions in the chat, a lot of information. Really need to have that. So we can now please halt the live streaming.